This podcast is brought to you by Metasites. Click the link in the description and support Moore's Law is Dead by trying out that demo for free. And also support Moore's Law is Dead with the offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off all Microsoft software at cdkeyoffer.com. Or you can also support us with the offer code BrokenSilicon by buying Vite Ramen. Using that offer code gets you 10% off that tasty, high-protein, healthy ramen. We'll talk about these sponsors more later, but for now, let's just get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I am joined by my co-host,
Dan.
Hello, Dan. How are you?
Good. We're going to talk the entire episode in this tone.
In a very pleasing and unaggressive tone, everybody. No, I mean, I think to use my actual voice, I'm doing pretty well. I just actually saw Giannis Pappas in Louisville with some friends, and I gotta say, guy's still very, very, very funny.
That's what I would expect.
But outside of that, it's been a busy weekend. This has been I'll be, as of course, Dan, going up to Minnesota to be with our side of the family from my perspective during the Christmas holidays. And this whole week is basically just me with my girlfriend seeing all aspects of her family before she voyages to the Great White North. And the funny thing is, of course, Emma's all from Nashville and very much so from Nashville, and her family is too. And they think we're just going north of the wall in Game of Thrones. I mean, they've given her new coats, pants to keep warm, socks. And from their perspective, we are about to go see Jon Snow.
Well, I mean, very few people know this, but unless you've been to Minnesota, there are wildlings that do try to kill you.
There are.
Reflexively.
Mm-hmm.
But if you meet up with Craster's Keep, he can get you an in.
I don't think I want to spend any time talking about Craster's Keep or what's going on over there in this episode. But what I will say is I was laughing with her and I was like, it's going to be very scary. Things in Minnesota will be about 15 degrees colder than where we are now, and we'll still be inside.
Well, to be fair to most people, the cultural touchstone for Minnesota is Fargo, so...
Yes, so everyone thinks that it is a dangerous... Everyone thinks that it's like if Grand Theft Auto was in Alaska, basically.
Yep, that's definitely what most people think.
But otherwise, how are you doing, Dan?
I'm pretty good. I've mostly recovered from COVID at this point. There's still the, tail end symptoms that you get when you get sick, where it's like I'm still a bit clogged up and my voice isn't all the way back, but... last week when the day I found out I had it, it was the day we recorded, and I almost canceled because I was like, I'm not feeling super great.
And it's happened before where me and you have gotten sick and we've had to make a judgment call. Are we going to push this back 16 hours? Maybe record Monday morning and try to have Gerard edit it during the day so we can post it to patrons and then of course publicly on Tuesday, or we can try to record earlier and I remember it was like on a knife's edge. Well, let's just try to record a little earlier on Sunday instead of pushing it back to Monday. And then on Monday, you told me
I basically couldn't talk. So that was a good choice.
And we still played video games that night, but yeah, you were in a much rougher spot. It is a very, very good decision that we recorded slightly earlier on Sunday instead of pushing it back to Monday, for sure.
But yeah, I mean, I really only had 2 days where symptoms were bad, so it wasn't the worst. But
no, I'd say there was maybe half a week where it was even noticeable. And talking to you right now, it's not noticeable at all. At least relatively speaking.
Yeah, but I usually don't try to speak in a super high register, which is I just can't go outside of like the bottom of my vocal range right now. So it shouldn't really sound any different, I don't think.
Well, moving forward to actual subjects that relate to gaming hardware, we have corrections here. One correction that I'm going to read here today from QH Freddy, who writes in and says, in Broken Silicon 232, you say that AMD has done this before when it comes to gaining performance while reducing die size and memory bandwidth. But that completely omits the fact that GCN was an architecture already stressed way beyond its limits before Vega came out. And then RDNA was such a radical departure architecturally that it wasn't that crazy to expect performance parity at 60% of the memory bandwidth. So unless you are saying that AMD is making the same sort of a leap going from RDNA 3 to RDNA 4, I don't really see why you keep acting like it's totally believable that RDNA 4 might match Navi 21 performance with a significantly smaller die size. Well, I mean, I wrote up a response to this, QH Freddy. Thank you for writing in. I said, let's just be clear about this. We don't know the exact die size yet, memory speed, or we don't really know how much of a home run they think RDNA 4 is going to be at. I guess the one thing I touched to on the architecture success part is this is an architecture that has a lot of its parts going into like RDNA 3.5, the consoles, RDNA 4 APUs coming out the next year, and this is a big push. So with RDNA 3, in many respects, I think half of it was just getting the teraflops to be much closer to NVIDIA for like selling into AI and stuff. Mm-hmm. Like I've seen a lot of reports. I think it was Roger Kadori's new company or something. Like they just said, screw it. We're just going to buy a bunch of Navi 31 graphics cards because if we write the software ourselves, we're getting teraflops for like half the price of any other alternative. In many ways, that was the goal of RDNA 3 itself. But it didn't, sounds very harsh, it didn't have to really succeed that well. Like NVIDIA was going all out on cost, making really expensive stuff. AMD just had to make something that didn't up cost, but upped performance, and they did. RDNA 4 is going into the PlayStation 5 Pro to a certain extent. Like aspects of it are going into APUs. Like this one needs to be more efficient, right? This is what it's all about. So, and the fact that they would cancel, from at least what I've heard, other people have heard, the high end of RDNA 4 should tell you that they just really want to make these things they're releasing, the mid-range and lower, work really well. So I actually don't think it's absurd to think this is a large uplift compared to normal. Does it need to be as big as RDNA 1 after Vega? I mean, again, we don't know the die size. What if the die size is a little bigger than we expected? What if the memory bandwidth is larger than we expected? Going from RDNA 2 to RDNA 3, they didn't have as much of a bandwidth increase in like GDDR6 speed as we saw from, I mean, a lot of other architectures in the past. If they use really fast GDDR6, using a smaller bus doesn't seem insane. It's not even AMD's design that would be succeeding, just the new memory being made. At the same time, directly responding to like the overall thought, like, guys, RDNA 3 underperformed expectations by 20 to 30%. And so I just don't think it's that wild to think that going from something that underperformed to something that has to succeed for Sony and all of their OEM customers might make up a bigger leap than you guys might expect. And again, Navi 32 has a 200 millimeter squared graphics die. That's it, on 5 nanometer. They're going to 4 nanometer. They're going monolithic. That saves a bunch of die space. If they can make Navi 32 performance at 200 millimeters squared, is it that insane to think they can make the same thing around 300 or lower on 4 nanometer? And now it's monolithic, so they're saving space on what would be the GCDs. I don't think it's that crazy at all. And again, remember, faster memory, more mature and better node, all of these things put together mean getting around Navi 31 with Navi 32 performance that had a lot of die space inefficiencies. I just don't think it's as wild as some people seem to think it could be.
I mean, yeah, it's a big leap in performance for size, but I mean, for the die size, but that's kind of what you expect with any die shrink. I mean, any architecture that's going to a smaller node. So I don't know. We'll see. And like you also say, not RDNA 4 does kind of have to exceed, not from like just the perspective of OEMs, like you said, but also from the perspective of their graphics division. I think being in a tenuous position, even if RDNA 3 is doing well sales wise.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, if this didn't do well, Sony will be mad. This is their chance to push into laptop. I mean, This is all it's trying to do. It's not trying to up teraflops and all this other stuff like RDNA 3 did or prove chiplets. Just trying to do this. And again, think about it this way, QH Freddy. I mean, what if it uses 24 gigabit per second memory or something, or 27, or like you're talking about, what is that, 20, 30, 40%, like 20 to 40% faster memory than what's in Navi 32. There you go. There's your performance leap, assuming that you can make use of a little bit of a denser node and remove the die size inefficiencies of going monolithic. There's your extra silicon. There's your extra bandwidth without even talking about how good the architecture is. You know, so I just think there's still a lot of unknowns, but from my perspective, I stand by this just doesn't sound insane at all when I'm being told. And it's not just one person, like it's pretty verified. They aim for Navi 31 performance around there, at least, if not around a 4080 with a die size that they can at least claim as mid-range. But again, remember, mid-range is like anything between like 200 to 350 millimeters squared too. So just remember that as well. All right, but speaking of things that are not aiming to be super cheap, let us move on to the first story here. Story number 1, exact Nvidia 40 Super release dates leaked. According to leaked documents shared by video cards, which look similar to ones I used for leaking in the past, and a source of mine says should be legit, doesn't just say, actually got sent the documents right before we started recording. So I can just verify what video cards has here for release dates. I also have these documents now as well. It states that the super release cadence is as follows. On January 8th, the RTX 4070, 4070 Ti, 4080 Super will be announced as exclusively leaked by, I don't know if it was exclusive, I think it was exclusively leaked by Moore's Law is Dead. And then on January 8th, there is also allowed for unboxing. Then January 16th is when the MSRP 4070 Supers will get reviewed. January 17th, non-MSRP models can get reviewed. January 23rd, it's like a week later, 4070 Ti Super MSRP reviews. January 24th, non-MSRP. January 30th, so a week later, RTX 4080 Super MSRP reviews, and the 31st non-MSRP. In other words, NVIDIA will, on January 8th, announce the Super Series. A week later, 4070 Super comes out. A week later, 4070 Ti Super comes out. And a week later, 4080 Super comes out. I also got told by a contact right before we started recording that the major push on volume at first will be 4070 Super. Like, that's what they're put, and that should bring 4070 Ti performance to below 700, or at least below 650, if not $600. So there you go. The staggered release in January, this channel leaked a month ago, seems to be entirely true. And now we know the specific dates. What do you think, Dan?
I mean, obviously they're trying to turn this into the entire month of January for reviews. And I think that's a pretty good idea. I mean, I don't think, to my knowledge, there's any other thing that will interfere with that except for like maybe reviews for Hawk Point or something. But
early reviews for that.
So yeah, I think they'll have a pretty, I don't know, have the entire month of January to themselves. And it makes sense to me that they're targeting the 4070 first because, 4070 Super first, because I personally, I think that's where they're the weakest in their lineup.
Besides 4080.
Well, and the 4080, which the 4070 Ti Super will also address that, hopefully.
Yeah, you bringing up that this will be like before Hawk Point makes me realize, like, if Hawk Point, and especially if there was like, I don't know what it would be. I mean, RDNA 3 is basically entirely out, but let's say there was some, I don't know, RX 7850 XT coming out. I think then they would push up their launches. But the fact is, if we have nothing but Meteor Lake right now, and then nothing but Hawk Point in February, why would they not just take up the whole month for the press? Like, this is the month where they just can probably have it all to themselves. So if they can, might as well do it.
Yeah, I mean, and there's not really anything from AMD that I can think of where they could try to do to take that.
Maybe a 7800M, but I haven't asked about if that exists. But something like that is all I can think of.
Or what about a 6850 Golden Rabbit edition?
I mean, I'm kind of tired of talking about all these Golden Rabbit editions. Well, no, if it came out then, wouldn't it be the Dragon edition or something?
Oh, you might be right. I don't remember. I forgot. This 2023 is the year of the rabbit, not 2024.
The year of the we make something for the Chinese market and can't sell it there anyways edition. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, the only other thing I can think to really discuss about this is I wonder what you think about the idea of what I just said, which isn't in the write-up, but like, that the 4070 Super is going to be the bulk of the volume. Do you think that's because they think that's where it'll do best? Or, and here's a theory I want to throw out there, I think that's just the one that's like ready. Like the 4070 Super is the 4070 Ti cut down 5%. I think we had reports that wasn't being produced a couple months ago. Like this is a nothing change. Like this is literally change the sticker. The boards can be the same. Everything can be the same. 4070 Ti Super, you could argue that, but no, there might be a little more shifting and like making a cheaper board compared to the 4080 for that. For the 4070 Super, I think it's launching early because they're literally just taking like a 4070 Ti die and putting it on a 4070 board or keeping it on the same board.
Well, I mean, if I'm understanding correctly which dies all of them use, the 4070 would be the easiest. I mean, the 4070 Super is the one that's probably actually easier to put out than what they all existing SKUs that
right, because the 4070 Ti Super tries to bring 10 to 15% weaker performance than the 4080 to like 40, like a third less money. And the 4080 Super is trying to up performance while lowering costs. There's probably more thought being put into how to make those boards slightly more tailored. 4070 Super, I mean, I think you're just taking a 4070 Ti die and putting it on a 4070 board, or just keeping the same board and charging $700 or something.
I mean, yeah, this is also effectively a cancellation of the 4070 Ti. I mean,
that's
a
good point too.
It could just be, well, now our binning is process for the 4070 Super is slightly easier than the binning process for the 4070 Ti. So, yeah, that makes sense why it would be the highest volume, and also that price point in a normal market would be just the highest volume price point versus
right, because although
like $1,400,
although relatively speaking, the 4080 is like one of the biggest sales failures in GPU history. It's still not like the $500 price point range. So there's a chance that NVIDIA may go, we need the 4070 Super out now because, and I've been hearing this consistently. I decided not to make a quote leak thing slide for this today, but I'm just hearing nothing but the 7800 XT is selling gangbusters. I mean, this thing is flying out the door at all retailers. And there's a chance that even if the 4080 needs the most help, it's all relative. What needs help is NVIDIA does not want to lose the upper mid-range, and that's what they're looking at here. And so 4070 Super, I mean, that one should bring what, like 15% higher performance to the same price point, roughly speaking, as the 4070. That pretty much puts it in parity with the 7800 XT, besides the amount of RAM it has. But that's probably enough to fix the sales there.
Yeah. I mean, I think at that price, the 4070 Super is maybe a good competitor to the 7800 XT, and the 7800 XT is the perfect like price in the market right now as it exists, because that's all people are buying, I guess.
I mean, relatively speaking, that's what it seems like. Well, I mean, I thought we should cover this, because it matters the exact dates. But I think what you're going to be seeing is a lot of thumbnails that are green out of this channel in January. I don't know that I have anything else to say about it right now.
Yeah, well, hopefully the month of January is where this podcast becomes an Nvidia shilling podcast again, Tom.
Oh, maybe we can get accused of being in. It's weird how this year, 2023, there was some accusations of that. I'm always fascinated how we go from being called AMD fanboys to Intel fanboys in 2021 to AMD. Now somehow Nvidia, because we said Lovelace is good. I mean, I don't know.
Now this is an Intel hater channel, though, Tom.
Now it's an Intel hater channel that's secret Nvidia fanboys, because we're haters, because we think you should up performance with the new generation.
Yeah.
Crazy for us to want that out of a company. But all right, let us then move on to said company with story number 2. Intel launches Emerald Rapids. All right, so I have a write-up here from Serve the Home that I added on to, or me and Carver added on to. When looking at the Intel Xeon Emerald Rapids CPUs, Intel has some undoubtedly awesome technology. For that sweet spot of the market that does not buy top-end CPUs, the built-in acceleration can give more performance per core that is well beyond a simple 10 to 15% generational improvement. Likewise, we can get new classes of devices like CXL Type 3 memory expander device support that Sapphire Rapids did not have. However, the part that is a complete bummer with Emerald Rapids is how the SKU stack was created. Intel did not enable acceleration for things like Quick Assist on every SKU. Intel is holding back its biggest differentiators that it bases many of its performance claims on from huge portions of the consumer base. And look, maybe this made sense back with older generations in an era of no competition with Xeon. These days, Intel is selling flagships with half the core count of AMD's EPYC chips per socket. And so we believe they need to realign its methodology for designing SKU segmentation. And that is really the gist of what there is to say on this one. Look, EMR, Emerald Rapids, ups core counts from 60 to 64 and then clocks them higher than Sapphire Rapids, includes more cache, offers faster DDR5 5600 memory as standard, and offers support for CXL memory expanders and boosted AMX, AI, and other accelerated performance, notably over SPR as well. However, nothing changes with the fact, though, that Intel is still incapable of competing on the top end in raw computational power. Genoa crushes Sapphire Rapids at this most important metric for data center. Now, Bergamo is out to maintain a healthy lead against Sapphire Rapids in this metric from AMD. And so one could argue that Emerald Rapids is really what Sapphire Rapids should have been the whole time. It's still kind of not enough. But at least in my opinion, this is where I editorialize here, it actually seems like it could do what I want a Meteor Lake to do. Whether it catches up to the competition or not, it is a marked improvement over its predecessor, and it should have a solid 6-month time period where it's legitimately improving Intel's situation before AMD launches the next gen. That next gen Zen 5 Turin will undoubtedly crush this, but at least Intel has made things better for themselves and not stagnated, and proven they can make a large generational improvement less than a year after their predecessor. So yeah, then, what did you think of Emerald Rapids?
I mean, from what I'm able to understand from like the documents and slides and everything, it looks like Emerald Rapids is at least creating a situation where AMD is no longer lapping Intel when it comes to performance with EPYC, and that's good. The one thing I'll say is I think it's I don't know if there's a silicon reason why certain features aren't in certain SKUs, but I think it's
I don't think so.
If it's a deliberate choice to like gate it so people have to spend more money to get the full feature set with like lower core count products, I think that's stupid in the position Intel's at right now. But
yeah, I mean, I think what was it? Let's get away from what Intel claimed and just go into what the reality was. I mean, Genoa was like, I don't know, 30 to 50% better than Sapphire Rapids or something, or 20 to 45%, somewhere around there. But then if you took into account efficiency and some other factors, it could be way more than that in extreme scenarios. Emerald Rapids, you know, especially in specific tasks, seems to be like just a hair below Genoa. And yeah, I'd say it almost feels like if Ice Lake was even better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like it's not caught up, and AMD does a Bergamo out now, which makes it so you really can't argue Intel's caught up to AMD. But it doesn't feel like Intel's a full generation behind. Again, yes, Turin's about to come out. Yes, Turin's going to go to 128 and 192 cores with all this other stuff. But it feels like to me, you know, all Sapphire Rapids did is like slightly beat Zen 3, and we were like, whatever. And what Emerald Rapids does is, even if it's closer to when the next AMD chip comes out, it feels like it's only a little behind in some methods. It's still AMD's better price performance and efficiency, but this seems like something that will help Intel's position far more than I would argue, we'll talk about later, Meteor Lake did.
Yeah, I mean, at least it's executing on something, which is fundamentally the position Intel's in right now, where that's a good thing for them, because their last few releases, I would say, don't completely fail to execute on, and their existence is barely justified, in my opinion. But
you know, and the only other thing I'd kind of say about, well, two other things. Number one, yeah, I mean, I don't know. We have at least proof in what's come out so far about Emerald Rapids that a HEDT/workstation version of this could make Intel actually compete better than a lot of people might expect if it's priced right. Priced right. Because Sapphire Rapids workstation just wasn't worth considering, in my opinion, because of its absurd power consumption issues. Even over Zen 3, which was really pathetic. But Emerald Rapids, I mean, you know, if you price it decently better per core, you can give, you know, somebody monolithic, 28 or 32 core or something for like way less than what AMD's offering at the same price. This catches up at a minimum to Zen 4 and per core. This is the type of workstation product that I think a lot of people are looking for, and at least early evidence is that it will be as good as we were hoping it would be.
Yeah, so I mean, good props to Intel then. Maybe this won't be the server solution, but workstation is still a pretty big market, so
yeah,
or lucrative market, I should say.
The only other two things I would say is a good thing. Hopefully this is evidence, though, that Intel can execute in under a year and have another generation, because they need Granite Rapids out in, like, frankly now, but they within 8 months. And if they can prove they can do this, who knows? Maybe going to Intel 3, they can actually catch up to Turin roughly around when Turin's launching out. And then at least in data center, Intel will have finally stopped the bleeding. That's the good news. The other thing I would say is, though, I have to point out Emerald Rapids uses fewer chiplets than Sapphire Rapids, almost suggesting Intel realized they are at their best if they use as few chiplets as possible still. Again, and quite a contrast to what we'll talk about. The other thing that they released this week. All right, well, let us shift to the other data center story of today with story number 3. MI300X and MI300A launched at AMD's AI show. And again, quoting from Serve the Home, and then I have some stuff at the end added on. Frankly, we thought this series was launching back in June, but today is apparently now the official actual launch date of MI300. As part of the MI300 series, we get two family members. The MI300A is the APU or CPU plus GPU. Then there's the MI300X, which is the company's big GPU. It has 192 HBM3 per accelerator, tons of memory bandwidth, infinity favorite bandwidth. These numbers are handpicked to be competitive with Nvidia, and AMD is leaning into them. AMD has not just a GPU, but a technological marvel on their hands here, because there are 8 XCDs for compute, 4 IO dies, 8 HBM3 stacks, 256 megabytes of cache, and 3.5D packaging that we will get into more later in the article that I pulled from. The AMD Instinct MI300A, on the other hand, takes around 75% of the MI300X and keeps that part while replacing a quarter of the platform with CPU compute. AMD is using its Zen 4 cores found in other chips like Genoa X and Genoa. And so there you go. These products claim to tie H100 in training and defeat it in inferencing and other AI tasks. We'll have to wait for independent testing to see if that ends up true in practice. And NVIDIA has already made a stink about AMD showing off unrealistic benchmarks, by the way, but I didn't really have time to confirm if they were worth pointing out more than what AMD's claiming. I will say, though, that plays into my argument that it seems like MI300 is kind of better than H100, but it doesn't feel like an entire gen or two ahead of it. Like, it feels like H100 came out and this is a little better, but it came out later. But anyways, generally speaking, the big question remaining is how long until this is actually in the market, and will MI300A be adopted outside of HPC? Luckily, there will be time to find out these answers, but for now, at least it looks like AMD brought its tech to the table and has declared its intent to take on NVIDIA head-on with more advanced chip packaging and bigger chips. Unlike many AI startups that have failed, AMD can leverage its other lines for chiplet technology and scale to win customers. Well, if they actually prove they are manufacturing at scale, we are going to have to wait and see. So yeah, Dan, what did you think about MI300?
I mean, it looks like AMD is actually serious, or attempting to be serious about challenging Nvidia in the gigantic AI market right now. So, which there's a ton of money there. So, I mean, I think they kind of have to try to do it, but we'll see when it comes out, because I think that's important.
Right. It feels like they were acting like it launched half a year ago. And if I remember correctly, in our Broken Silicon, we said, it doesn't really seem like it's out yet, guys. This is really competing almost with next gen.
Yeah. And I don't know. It claims to be out right now. We'll see how many things it's being adopted in, because, I mean, NVIDIA is definitely the market leader in AI right now. So, I mean, I guess we'll see what their tests look like when they're actually independently verified by third-party sources. But yeah, I mean, having two competitors or having more competitors in the space will hopefully drive innovation.
Yeah, well, and I think what I said too in my video that my data or my AI AMD AI analysis video that I put out like a week or so ago, like I feel bad because I almost feel like I glossed. Apparently, I can't talk right now. Glossed over the MI300 part, but this is a gaming hardware channel predominantly, so I don't feel like it's worth putting as much effort into it. But my take was it's a little better, but I think the biggest asset AMD has is that it exists. Like the problem so far has been Nvidia launched H100 at such an insanely perfect time, it's ridiculous. And then anything else should have been outpriced competitively, and it would have done well. And I think that's really the main issue for Nvidia with this product launching is it exists. But I'm not seeing, at least from the experts I hear talk about it, say that Nvidia is screwed here. It just doesn't seem like it. There are pros and cons to both platforms, and Nvidia has a first mover advantage. And this kind of needed to be over a generation better, I think, for the specs itself to be the reason, the main reason we would be talking about this. I think the main reason we're talking about this is AMD has a product that seems at least as good as Nvidia, and if they have the volume, people probably shouldn't underestimate how much money they can make off of AI. But again, I'm not seeing something here where Nvidia can't compete.
Yeah, and I will say though, just looking at the marketing material, I mean, I think they're making some pretty bold claims where they're kind of trying to suggest that this is outright better in pretty much every application than the H100. So that's bold marketing, and they have to live up to it.
I'm sure there are some things where it's just full on better.
Oh yeah, I'm sure, but if they do need to execute on all of that stuff if they don't want to look like jackasses.
Yeah, and I guess we'll have to see what happens with Blackwell in a year. But from what I'm hearing, NVIDIA is launching AI and professional versions of Blackwell as soon as they can. So it wouldn't surprise me if they actually started revealing it. I don't know if probably not at CES, but mid next year, less than a year.
Is that
it's the very beginning of January.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I don't think they're, but I think they will have revealed it by mid next year. And again, people will point to a benchmark where MI300 wins by 20, 40, 60, maybe 80%. And I'll go, yeah, but how much faster is H100 than A100? I think B100 is not going to be 40% faster. And then will AMD have a 350? Because I've heard there's an MI350X. Ready by then, maybe. Will they have MI400X ready? Probably not. So I think it still comes down to, can AMD just manufacture this in volume and take advantage of the next 6 months? Because that's really what they got to do for this to be successful. Because as much as if this was in gaming and we saw 60% performance when we go, well, that's a generation better. Right, but that's in gaming. In AI, they seem to be at least doubling every gen. So,
well, yeah. I mean, AI's dedicated AI engines and graphics cards are in their infancy, so you would expect that every generation is going to be substantially bigger than the gaming market.
And still, a lot of it is training right now, if not most or almost all of it. And that is where MI300 isn't better. So, Welcome to Metasites, a unique space where you can immerse yourself in a world of endless possibilities and entertainment. There are many key locations you can check out for free, like a bustling metropolis where you can stroll through the streets and listen to music, admire the urban landscapes, play hidden object games, or engage with AI personalities who live and work in the city and can share their unscripted story with you. Or perhaps you love luxury cars, then you should check out the Car Shop location. Here you can customize a car to your liking and immediately test it on the city roads, or maybe you prefer a mountain serpentine. It really doesn't matter what you want to do. The choice is yours. Anything is possible here. And I encourage you to engage in a virtual world like never before with Metasites at the links in the description. Remember that jumping into Metasites through the link in the description, just doing that alone helps Moore's Law is dead a ton. So if you're at all interested, support the channel by clicking on that link in the description, which is totally free to do so. It's free to jump online and it helps the channel. Check out Metasites today. But moving on to an AI product where we actually may have something better than the competition, with story number 4, AMD Hawk Point and Strix Point revealed. Quoting from AnandTech, and also I added to it, Although CES 2024 is happening next month in Las Vegas, where new APUs are usually revealed, AMD has lifted the lid on their latest Zen 4 mobile processors early today in December on the Ryzen Mobile 8040 series. Codename Hawkpoint, the Ryzen Mobile 8040HS series is set to be the successor to this year's, or almost last year's, Phoenix mobile chips. Two new families of Ryzen mobile chips have also been announced, though, including mid-range 8040HS APUs in the lower-powered 8040U series, with lower TDP design for thin and light notebooks. Ranging from 8 cores and 16 threads down to 4 cores and 8 threads, AMD's Ryzen mobile series has 9 SKUs, as of writing, and is a direct refresh of the previous Phoenix series rather than really a complete overhaul. This means AMD's Zen 4 core architecture manufactured on TSMC's 4nm node sets to take center stage yet again in their notebooks. And they do, though, incorporate the Ryzen AI NPU developed by Xilinx into 9 of these SKUs that are quite a bit faster. Not single-digit faster, but 60% faster, which translates apparently to 40% better AI performance. And based on the analysis of this channel and the video that was put out that day, this was announced, one should expect a roughly 5 to 15% performance uplift for Hawkpoint over Phoenix, besides an AI where it should be 40%. And with some margin for error, though, if AMD cherry picked, I could see it being, more to like 3 to 10%, depending on, because I actually, by the way, everybody in that video went through AMD's EndNotes, took every single game they listed that I could find results for online and averaged them, and found that in gaming, I think Hawkpoint's going to be like 5 to 9% faster than Phoenix. In multi-threading performance, I think they're going to be like 7 to 15% faster. So just wanted to get that out early, but that's not all. At the announcement, AMD also confirmed Strix is coming out next year. And at least one of its specs is now 100% confirmed to line up with a previous leak out of this channel, stating that there will be a massive uplift in AI performance from Hawkpoint to Strix to around 50 tops. And so while Hawkpoint is poised to be a non-negligible uplift over Phoenix, I would say that you can think of Hawkpoint as kind of like, maybe not Renoir to Cezanne, but I think bigger than Zen to Zen Plus. Strix looks like possibly, I was thinking about this today, the biggest APU uplift in AMD history since Renoir, Raven Ridge. Yeah. I mean, this might be the biggest APU uplift in a very long time from AMD. And so, yeah, this was a typical part of game of brinksmanship, with AMD preempting Intel's Meteor Lake launch by announcing its competitors, Hawkpoint and Strixpoint, at their Advancing AI event. But Hawkpoint doesn't look non-negligible, and Strixpoint looks like a huge uplift in performance for laptops next year. All right, Dan, what did you think?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any information in this that we really haven't discussed before.
It's a side effect of us leaking all of this stuff months early. Is it's one of those press presentations from AMD where it's like, and Moore's Law was right, ding, 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 about all this stuff, but we already talked about it a little.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm excited to see that this stuff is officially out, not out, is officially announced and on its way. But Hawkpoint, in my opinion, isn't all that interesting of a chip. It's just a thing that they kind of had to put out because they needed something to put out next to Meteor Lake, and it looks like it might be better overall than Meteor Lake, but it's not that big of it's not that huge of a deal in my mind. It's just we need a new CPU or APU line every year.
Yeah, what I would say is the thing that I want to most watch with Hawkpoint is in February, at least by the end of the month, February 2024. Is Hawkpoint widely available? Are those the Lenovo laptop that you got a couple months ago, Dan? Is that one that's being sold from Lenovo's website by March? Instead of saying 7840HS, is it saying 8845HS? Mm-hmm. And is it easy to buy, not going out of stock in a day? That's what I will be watching, because that's really what Hawkpoint's ace in the hole is. It seems like it will be overall better than Meteor Lake, cheaper than Meteor Lake. Software will have been out and well supported. Chassis don't need updating. Right. So if this is the year, which I think it could be, or the 2 years, 2024 through 2025, of AMD going for laptop market share hard, then the point of Hawkpoint is having volume going with better specs than the competition before Strix is out. And if it doesn't do that, maybe it's better than Meteor Lake, but that's not saying much. But that was kind of the way Hawkpoint would be an ace in the hole.
Yeah, I mean, AMD, this is their opening in the market. Intel has generally remained decent on laptop, despite the fact that their desktop is complete nightmare for them at this point. But they've always been able to remain competitive in laptop. And if this Meteor Lake is the first time they're failing as a company design wise is showing up really strongly in laptops. So if they don't go for it now, they're really missing their shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying. I guess the only other thing is, when I guess that feeds into like, I forgot to say it, but like just adding on here, the people who would want to buy Hawkpoint, they'd want to buy it because it's easy to get and cheap, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, probably like wait for Strix, wouldn't you say?
I mean, yeah, I think if you're, I think Strix is the product to wait for. One of the first times I think in a while that there's been a product where if you can, it's worth waiting for, I think.
Yeah, because again, let's just say Hawkpoint's 10% better than Phoenix. Just call it that. Maybe, who knows? Maybe there'll be efficiency surprises. Could be. I don't know, though. But, then you look at Strix and you're like 8 to 12 cores. And the 12 cores are at least 15, 20% better each, if not more than that. And then the graphics is going from 12 RDNA 12 RDNA 3 to 16 RDNA 3.5. And the AI is like quadrupling in performance. I've got to just say it then. Well, tripling to quadrupling. But, this is like Renoir to Cezanne in CPU. No, more than that. This is like Zen 1. This is like Raven Ridge to Renoir and Cezanne to Rembrandt's graphics at the same time. They're probably going to have at least 30% better graphical performance, if not up to, I'd say, double. So let's just call it 40 to 60% better graphics performance. I mean, you're looking at like dedicated, very weak, but dedicated graphics performance in an APU, like 30, 50 laptop performance, which you have one on your laptop, and it's actually fine if you're 1440p or lower even. And then you're also going to a CPU that will beat all existing CPUs on desktop. I mean, like 12 core Zen 5 could be up there. Probably not with the 7950X because that'll still be clocked faster, but in multi-threading, but mostly be up there with even expensive desktop CPUs at the same time. All of that in a 45 watt APU. That's going to be crazy. That's the one to wait for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and depending on how well it performs at low power, I would think that's going to go into a lot of the next generation of handheld stuff too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see on that one. So far, I know officially of Strix. Is there a little Strix? How does it do? Because a lot of these handhelds, I have to say, like the ROG Ally, I'm really annoyed with how they're shoving 8 Zen 4 cores, wasting energy, throttling, sucking energy away from the GPU that should be getting most of the focus. Like, I would wonder if there's like a 6-core plus 16 or even plus 12 RDNA 3.5 little Strix that's out there somewhere or not, because that's what you'd actually want to use. If not, can you guys please just disable, like, I don't know, 2 of the standard cores and 8 of the little cores and take any of those yields that are the worst CPU yields with as much of the graphics as you can enable and put that in handhelds? Because in that case, I think it would be big. But otherwise, it doesn't really matter if you're making it use 45 watts.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it has, like you said, like half the cores or maybe even just 4 cores, but the full iGPU, that would be ideal for those. But, I don't know how. I'm still not sure of how niche of a product those are. They get a ton of coverage, but I'm not sure how many people are actually buying them.
Yeah. No, I think it's still mostly the Steam Deck. But all right, let us move on to a different APU that was announced in this news cycle with story number 5, which was going to be the lead story, but I just wanted to start with happier stuff before we talked about this again. Story number 5, Meteor Lake released with limited early reviews. So where do we even start on this one? Well, I guess we'll just start here. In August, Intel stated that Meteor Lake would be their next Centrino moment. Now, that was a meteoric success for Intel, where they conquered the laptop market up to efficiency, and then on the back of Core 2 Duo, took the x86 market. That is what Centrino was. Meanwhile, the early reviews we have for Meteor Lake show from Jared's Tech that, if anything, a battery life regression has happened between Raptor Lake to Meteor Lake. Dave 2D in his review video showed Meteor Lake behind Phoenix in efficiency and tying and integrated graphics. And Notebook Check did the most in-depth test. Really, what I would say was, I'd say Dave 2D's was kind of there, but almost arguably the only full review. And they showed that Meteor Lake overall loses in multi-threading performance to Phoenix between 28 to 45 watts, the most important range, people. And lost in iGPU, lost in efficiency overall as well compared to Phoenix. And from there, it really doesn't get any better if you put closer inspection. Meteor Lake review samples, for example, tended to ship with faster memory than their on-sale counterparts. I saw a lot of Meteor Lake review laptops with like around 7300 DDR5, and then you actually take the exact same Asus laptop, go to Best Buy, 6400. So you're not even buying what was reviewed. And this faster memory, think about that. That's oftentimes 10, 20, 30, 40% faster than what's in a lot of these Phoenix laptops. Still just ties Phoenix, and bandwidth is a huge aspect of when any integrated graphics perform well. And the scenarios where Meteor Lake beats the competition in efficiency seemed fairly unrealistic or borderline relying. For example, I'll have Gerard put a chart on screen here that shows the full curve for an i7 1370p and a Meteor Lake Ultra 7 165H. So that's last gen Intel, current gen Intel. And you can show like performance based on different TDP levels, like 28 watts, 35, 45, 65 watts. As you go up the curve, Meteor Lake looks pretty good. But then there's only one data point shown on this chart of Apple and Phoenix, which at first you might not think about until you realize, why aren't full performance per watt curves shown for Phoenix and Apple? And then you'll notice that they say Intel has similar efficiency and up to 11% higher performance. Right, there's like a narrow part of the curve where they win, and for most of it, they're below AMD and Apple in efficiency. And I don't have a quote slide for this, but I was also told today that there is Meteor Lake stock available now, but this is it. There might not really be any more availability after this if it sells out until February. So what else is there to say? Check out the Moore's Law Said video about it for more. But outside of that, I would just summarize by saying we have to emphasize that more in-depth reviews are really not out besides Notebook Chip. And I believe that as more in-depth reviews come out, like from Gamers Nexus, a 30-minute video, if Tim at Hardware Unboxed ever did a 30-minute video on this, or Jared's Tech usually does like 5 different videos on new APUs.
Yeah.
You know, as we see more and more 10-page review articles and 30-minute review videos, I feel like more red flags are going to be found. You know, the things I talk about in the video I put out about like goosing the memory speeds and hiding when it's efficient and having misleading charts, that was like me looking at them for an hour. If someone's job was to spend a week doing a review for this, I only think they're going to find worse things and find far more things to criticize. The more games in your average, based on what I can see, the more it leans towards actually Phoenix still beating Meteor Lake's integrated graphics. So to me, so far, this feels like Intel's bulldozer, not Centrino. They needed that, or at least a Zen 1 moment. All right, Dan, what did you think about Meteor Lake?
I'm hoping this is the last time we have to talk about Meteor Lake, frankly. But obviously it's not good. And from what I could tell, and I think the channels that got products did a good job of highlighting the flaws and kind of disingenuous ways that they state that they were sent these laptops in, where it's like you're getting a laptop that has faster memory than what they're offering, or you at least need to spend more money. I'm not sure if you can buy the faster RAM like on their website or something like that. It seems like all of these products are hiding behind other uplifts and performance that are around Meteor Lake.
Pairing them with the fastest SSDs, the fastest memory, the nicest screens, the largest batteries in the laptop. Yeah. But if you actually have the same memory speed, the same SSD, the same battery, memory speed and battery capacity compared to the AMD counterpart, Phoenix just seems to win across the board.
Yeah, it just looks like what they're doing is they're trying to hide their bad performance or their terrible product by having things that kind of get them out of that bad place. And this is just, honestly, it's pathetic at this point. Like, I know reviews were mostly lukewarm on it, but it's just bad. Like the brightest picture you can, or the most positive picture you can paint for Meteor Lake is that they partially caught up to a year-old product a month before the successor to that product comes out, and that successor isn't even a full
successor.
A full successor, and
it's Zen Plus, not Zen 2. You know, yeah, that type of a thing.
And then that thing is probably just going to outright beat this effort where they are claiming they're finally going for it when it comes to being an APU, and it's like you're really not at all. I mean, I don't know what else to say about Meteor Lake at a certain point. It's I've said this to you offline. Like, it almost feels like it would be better for optics if Meteor Lake just didn't come out, in my mind, and they were just using Raptor Lake instead.
You know, that's something that I've had contributors like Kari no Sugata and Carbon Cry point out to me, is like the question of should they have just not even launched Meteor Lake? And I've kind of stayed away from talking about that up until now. But the consensus, like me and Carrie came to, for example, is like that this had to come out. Like, Meteor Lake is one of those products that Pat and Intel have been hyping up since like 2021. And how would that look to investors if, like, you can cancel the successor? I think it was Rialto Bridge after Ponte Vecchio was canceled. They showed it off, but they didn't talk about it that much. They've talked about this so much, it has to come out. And on top of that, it is supposedly the foundation of Arrow Lake and Panther Lake and Lunar Lake and all of these things coming out. So all those things depend on this, that this had to come out. But if this was something no one had talked about yet and didn't have as much noise behind it, there is an argument it should have just been canceled 6 months ago.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. And that's where it comes back to Intel and their executives really need to become a little bit more humble, because you can't just keep hyping up your products over and over again that are failing, because this is the situation you get yourself in. Like you said, I see what your point is. Like, if they could have just quietly canceled this, maybe it wouldn't look that terrible, but they can't quietly cancel it because Pat Gelsinger is constantly talking.
He said it was their Centrino moment. I mean, QH Freddy writes in and he says, why do you think Pat is so absurdly overconfident about Intel's competitiveness?
I really don't know at this point. I think we talked about that in the Die Shrink, where we basically talked about this for the entire time. But I think all of these teams are lying to each other to create a rosier picture than how things are actually working at the company. And at a certain point, the higher ups need to realize that's what's going on, and realize that these teams are lying to them about something. Because there's no way you would go out and say, this is essentially the launch of Core 2, and then have it be a fart. Like, you can't do that.
Well, I'll have you, I don't know if I told you this, but I don't remember if it was a week or 2 weeks, but I think it was under 2 weeks before Meteor Lake came out. I was told by one of my best sources at Intel that Intel just held an emergency meeting that was about improving both the performance and the communication between their simulation teams, their design teams, and their manufacturing teams. That there's something clearly wrong with these teams communicating effectively. And when you hear something like that, you just go, yeah, so clearly leadership didn't know Meteor Lake was a fart. Clearly the design teams either weren't communicating correctly, or the simulation teams just can't simulate performance correctly. Something is wrong here. And until they solve that problem, Intel needs to start letting their launches do the talking and stop being overconfident and talking so much, because it's really making them look dumb. And it's making, if you're an investor right now, Pat told you this was Core 2. It's weaker than last gen.
Yeah.
If you're an investor in Intel, I don't know how you still are after seeing that. How will you trust anything this company says? I'm not being a hater. I'm not being unfair. I'm saying facts. Pat said Centrino. What we got was worse than last gen.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know why you would keep putting money into that company until they actually deliver on, I don't know, 2 or 3 launches in a row. Like, because they have Emerald Rapids, which was a success, but that's it.
That could be. It technically isn't widely
Sure.
available, I don't think, but
that wasn't. Sorry,
that
you have
seems
Emerald
like
Rapids.
it seems
that
like a
wasn't
step forward.
Yeah, that you have Emerald Rapids, which points to Intel getting its shit together a little bit.
And they didn't brag about that one that much either. This is a good example too.
But then you have it launched next to this, which this is going to get a lot more public discussion because it's a thing people, consumers actually buy, and it's somehow worse in almost every facet than what they had prior to this.
It's debatable if it's stronger than Raptor Lake. It's generally more efficient, sometimes a lot more, but it's not always more efficient. And compared to the competition, it just seems to be worse.
Yeah, it's just this just isn't good. There's a regression in IPC, regression in core count, somehow a regression in battery life.
Regression in that they are not launching higher core counts with it.
Yeah,
which gives me a chance to point this out, because this is where people would go, no, reviews show it's better than Raptor Lake. Guys, there was supposed to be an 8+16 and then at least a 6+16 die for Meteor Lake. We have pictures. We have pictures of Meteor Lake desktop chips for LGA 1851. I've already leaked charts that show that even above 120 watts, Raptor Lake crushes it. Once you get above like 165 watts or what you expect on desktop, Raptor Lake pulls, I think it starts to get double digits ahead of Meteor Lake. So again, let's be clear. Meteor Lake was supposed to be desktop and laptop, and all you can say is sometimes half the time on laptop it's more powerful, half the time on laptop it's more efficient. On desktop, it's just worse than Raptor Lake. That means it's worse than the previous generation. Anyone who says that it's actually better is forgetting they've already canceled half of it desktop because it was worse.
Yeah.
So it's 75% worse than Raptor Lake. Half of laptop, 25% of the overall picture. That's the only time it's better than Raptor Lake. Costs like over twice as much.
And then for some reason, they're trying to move on to a new branding scheme now where they call their fart Ultra or something. Where
don't call it Ultra now. Wait until you know it's good.
Well, I do think the opposite of that is what happens a lot of the time is when your product doesn't speak for itself, you go for a rebrand where you try to make the name sound bigger than its previous thing. That's kind of what I feel happened with the creation of the i9 branding. That's what happened to an extent, I think, when AMD was rebranding their Radeon line every frickin' generation.
That's true. It doesn't speak to confidence when, Nvidia didn't even, they went from 900 to 1000 to 2000. They don't want to do anything crazy because their brand's so strong. They'll just keep moving up every generation in number.
Nvidia hasn't really done a big rebranding of their graphics line since Tesla, I think. Right? That was the 9000 series, right?
Tesla. I mean, I think Tesla was 200, maybe.
Okay, so the one prior to that.
It's been a very long time because they haven't needed to.
Yeah, so that's what speaks to
right. And Intel created i9 when they had a 1,000 bazillion watt X processor losing to Zen 1 Threadripper. It's like Intel creates i9 to make up for the fact that they're worse. And they create Ultra to make up for you want to do it the other way. You make A9 when you win. You launch Ultra when you win. So people regard that brand now when they see Ultra, all they're going to see is an Ultra piece of shit, because that's what they remember from Ultra reviews. Ultra turds pinched off by Intel.
Yeah, so I don't know if this is just a one-time thing where they were branding it like this, or if they're going to try to continue with the Ultra thing in the future and more or less kill the i7 branding,
which still is pretty strong. I don't know why they would do that,
but there is something to be said that if this is a massive failure, maybe they can just sweep it under the rug. So it's that was the one time we did Ultra and we separated the launch from the i7.
I might have a new Intel leak coming soon. I don't think it's the end of Ultra.
That makes.
But that is a good point. The decision isn't made yet, though. They can always change that. That is a good point. What if they just got rid of it?
Yeah, and it actually turned out well because they didn't sully the i7 branding with whatever this is.
Yeah, like it's probably good AMD called Vega.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're wasting your time prodding through eBay searching for reasonably priced Windows keys? Well, there's no need to do that. Just go to cdkeyoffer.com during their Christmas super sale. Going to cdkeyoffer.com gets you reasonably priced Microsoft operating systems, Office products, and even many of the latest games on discount. And I think that this website actually is just important for PC gamers to have in an industry where we keep being nickeled and dimed over and over. Don't overpay for something that you basically have to buy to play all of the PC games out there. Go to cdkeyoffer.com. And, actually, cdkeyoffer.com has been a sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead for many years. Over the Christmas break, me and Dan, co-host of Broken Silicon, we will be gaming on our PCs, and both of them run operating systems bought through cdkeyoffer.com. Their stuff works. The community trusts them at Moore's Law is Dead. And so if you need any of these products, go there. Just clicking on the links in the description helps out the channel a ton. But if you need these products, make sure you use offer code BrokenSilicon to get 25% off all Microsoft products, and then Die Shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. Again, going there, using these keys helps the channel a lot. It helps save you money. Check out cdkeyoffer.com today. Carbon Cry writes in and he says, Tom, you claimed that Meteor Lake is Intel's bulldozer. I think it's worse. From Carbon Cry's perspective, Meteor Lake is not a bulldozer moment. Bulldozer was AMD realizing they really hadn't built on K6 or K7, and they now were in a deep technological hole. Something had to change, and they needed something new. Bulldozer was very daring, challenging, and new, but it didn't work. The same mindset allowed AMD to cut their losses immediately and try again for a revolution with Zen, which did work. Bulldozer at least shows that AMD was aware of their issues, and they actually were. They tried to fix them. They just failed. Meteor Lake doesn't really show that. Meteor Lake is Intel not acknowledging their issues, not committed to solving them, and it's them patching up holes in the Titanic of Nehalem version 12 over engineering patchwork solutions around their core weaknesses and problems. Not acknowledging this issue needs to be excised instead and re-architected properly. Bulldozer was a better sign for AMD if they got their shit together than Meteor Lake is for Intel, in my opinion. Bulldozer was AMD trying, but failing. Meteor Lake is Intel repeatedly and fully intentionally bashing their head against the wall. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the most one thing I'd highlight here too is, at least with Bulldozer, as much as it was a new node, it was a radical attempt. That's all it was. Meteor Lake doesn't just go for a radical new thing, new architecture, new node. It also goes for tiles, 3D stacking. Guys, by virtue of spending in brute force, Meteor Lake should be wildly more efficient than Phoenix. Like, what are they even doing with these tiles and cores? It's like they created LPE cores, these low power cores, to get around the fact that their big cores use too much energy, when maybe they should just make a good core.
It's really confusing to me how Intel can have such a larger R&D budget than AMD, really only focus on not half the markets, but focus on a smaller number of markets than what AMD is attempting to do.
They would argue it's the same number now, but sure.
Oh, yeah, the graphics market is doing really well, and Ponte Vecchio really revolutionized AI. I don't understand how it's really even possible for them to be failing this massively with the amount of money they spend on R&D. Like, the amount of money they spend on R&D is like comparable to what not completely comparable, obviously, but is like within an order of magnitude of what the US government spends on scientific research. It is an absurd amount of money, and this is what we're getting out of it. It's just bad.
Compressed Earth Blocks writes in, and he says, Dan, are you upset that you're using a Phoenix laptop right now, and to have a blank browser open with a fresh installed Windows that refreshes one tab every 15 seconds, that Intel beats you 2-1 in this metric? How do you feel about not having the efficiency king?
I feel really bad about it, honestly. I mean, That is the only thing I do with my laptop, Tom, is refresh a blank page every 15 seconds. Or, like I said on our dice drink, sleep in front of my laptop. And it is really good for that. Like, because, hell, if I did that for 2 nights in a row with my laptop, it might have no battery by the end of it. And with Intel, I might be able to get 2.5 nights out of that.
Of it just sitting there, you not using it. Yeah, that's what's so crazy about Meteor Lake too. I mean, you look at like what I think even AMD Rembrandt did, where it manages without an AI engine, by the way, Intel, while you're watching YouTube, even in a browser in a part of the screen, to run part of the screen at a lower frame rate. And thus save a ton of energy. Get situations where you can get AMD laptops using over a day's worth of battery life. Like, that's a real use case, though. And there's this one slide from Intel that shows like up to 79% more efficient than AMD. And then they show up to like 30 something, I think. And it's like 2 different metrics for idle usage. And as far as we can tell, they were like booted up a reduced version of Windows and didn't touch anything and used that to be their 79% efficiency increase. And it's like all of these ideas they had for Meteor Lake, like you're saying, all of this R&D, all of them seem to be scenarios that won't help anyone. What people want is at 20%, between 5 to 50% CPU usage, make that the most efficient, because that's when people are actually using their laptop. If they're not, put it in sleep mode or turn it off. Not, oh, I'm going to put the screen here at a low brightness level and refresh a tab every 15 seconds and just look at it. Not scroll. If I scroll, I have to use the other cores. Like, those situations are ridiculous. And it just shows a fundamental like lack of like vision to design an efficiency APU to do anything people actually do efficiently.
I mean, and that was my worry for what those LP
we talked
cores
about it
would
for
be,
months.
is that they functionally would only work if they would only do anything if you were doing like essentially nothing with the laptop. And yep, that's what it is. Like, great job. You guys innovated 2 new cores that do literally nothing and that's it. Like, they're great. They're great if you just need to leave the screen open, like what everybody's doing.
Right, because Meteor Lake has P cores, E cores, and low power E cores. These are like 1 to 2 gigahertz reduced Grace Monts, that only 2 of them. And again, this is the example I'd give anyone here: open Windows Task Manager, pull up the little chart that shows the CPU usage graph, grab your mouse, and especially if you can show logical core usage, shake your mouse around. You will see some cores spike to like 100% usage. Anytime it's spiking up like that, it has to enable the P cores or it will feel crazy sluggish. And so to just enable the LPE cores, you're getting sub-smartphone CPU performance here. And it would feel terrible if you did that. And so there's almost no scenario where the LPE cores can really do that much from what we can tell.
Yeah. It's like Intel designed a new type of core solely for marketing slides. And that's it. And once again, though, that is their main product at this point.
Marketing slides. Rialto Bridge. The Hollow Knight writes in and he says, what do you think the minimum performance for true efficiency needs to be? Like what Meteor Lake's LPE cores attempted to be, so that they would actually be enough where they were. Let's say 4 cores for only background tasks and web browsing. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, if they could have made a lower clock or some, like a Redwood Cove C, reduced cache, hits only 3 gigahertz, and maybe 4 of those cores with no hyper-threading, and then you make them as compact as possible, that's the type of thing that would make more sense to me. Wouldn't it make more sense to have a CPU tile with your predominant little and big cores? Because as far as we can tell so far, Intel's little cores are not about efficiency. They are about giving you more multi-threading performance in a smaller die space. Mm-hmm. And then maybe you actually even have your strongest cores be the ones on the SoC tile, so that maybe it's only a 10-20% benefit instead of what they were trying to get, which was a 79% benefit. But you could conceivably turn off the entire CPU tile for half of your actual usage. And when you do activate all of it for like gaming, or when you're doing all of that important work on Cinebench and 3D Mark, Well then, you're activating all of them. That's fine anyways. That I would think, but I'm not a CPU engineer, and I don't know if the P cores are so inefficient, it wouldn't have helped at all.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if even having more of these LPE cores was necessarily what they would have needed. Like maybe even just having the two LPE cores be able to clock higher for light browsing would have worked. But that's it.
Anytime it's E-cores,
know,
it's just going to be sluggish. So I would actually argue maybe they did it the opposite way. Maybe they should have had 8 normal E-cores on the CPU tile with maybe a couple extra P cores, and then maybe 2 P cores or something, so it wasn't sluggish.
Yeah.
That's what I'm suspecting. But even then, I think people just need to acknowledge Windows is not a light OS. I boot up my laptop, the first thing it's doing is like, which I need to uninstall that at some point here, I think, whatever the launcher is for Call of Duty. Battle.net.
Yeah.
Launching the EA app, launching Steam, checking my Skype messages and like emails. And then if I open Chrome, there are just like a bunch of Elden Ring weapon tabs and like things I'm shopping for on Amazon and my email accounts. There is no way to not have me using like half of the time, at least once a minute, more than a few cores.
Yeah.
So that's just how Windows works. So I don't know that the LPE cores even fundamentally make sense. And that maybe if you were smart, what you would do is just try to make the P cores as efficient and compact as you could. Man, if there was a company that could just take P cores and then have a version of them that take up less space and use less energy, they'd probably start succeeding really well.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a point to be made that if you have Steam running on Windows and it auto starts on startup, that might defeat LPE cores.
Like that alone. Trogaholic writes in and he asks, "Hi Tom and Dan, we use the terms bulldozer moment and Zen moment a lot, likely because they were respectively some of the biggest failures and successes we've seen in the CPU space in history. How big of a failure will Meteor Lake have to be for a Meteor Lake moment to be used? Will anything ever be big enough to replace the Zen moment?" Well, with respect to like comparing Meteor Lake to Bulldozer, I think just in people's memories, they're always going to think of Bulldozer as the worst because of its lineage. People do not talk or understand this enough. Go look at Bulldozer reviews. Go look at them. They look kind of like Meteor Lake reviews with like some websites giving them the seal of approval. Bulldozer was remembered badly because it didn't age that well and it didn't really have any great successors.
Yeah, I mean,
Sandy Bridge didn't get great reviews. It was remembered well because years later they realized that was the last big uplift. It wasn't known at the time. Nehalem was a pretty huge uplift over the predecessor.
Yeah, that's true. But like you said, Meteor Lake moment won't be a thing if Arrow Lake comes out and it's a smashing success. Because it wasn't the start of a trend. And that's where that's what a moment is. It's an inflection point. And if there isn't this isn't an inflection point, and this is actually just one bad lot product, it won't be remembered it won't be, it's not that it won't be remembered poorly. It just won't really be remembered.
All we can say is the extremes. It seems kind of similar to Bulldozer, and it's definitely not Zen 1. But outside of that, it's too early to say much else. And I could see a situation where this is like a Phenom 1 moment. Like if you go look up Phenom 1, it wasn't very great. It wasn't good, really. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't certainly Athlon. And it was Phenom 2 where everyone went, oh, they made it work. Maybe Arrow Lake will be Phenom 2 and not Pile Driver. I certainly hope so. But we're still starting lower than we were hoping we would be. Compressed Earth Blocks writes and it says, Tom, not to beat up on Intel or Meteor Lake too much, but what went wrong? The more reviews or people testing them, the more quirks this thing has, and its performance just seems all over the map. Is Intel throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks? Or are we seeing something that's necessary for them to learn new packaging for client going forward? Well, it's too early to say if that's what's going on for the latter. But in terms of what went wrong, I personally think it's fourfold. It's everything. Arc is clearly still a disaster. Redwood Cove massively failed its design goals. Multiple people have told me this is not the performance they expected out of Redwood Cove. They wanted an IPC increase, not a regression. That's nuts. And then also their LPE core idea made no sense for Windows. And then their tile tech seems to not be that efficient. So their tile tech isn't up there with their Infinity Fabric chiplet stuff AMD's doing. Their LPE idea seems to be a mistake. Redwood Cove failed and Arc's a disaster. It kind of seems like everything that went into Meteor Lake underperformed.
Yeah, and then I'll add a fifth one that we've already discussed. Intel's marketing is like shining a spotlight on their failures by overpromising.
The Hollow Knight writes in again and says, what are your thoughts on the fact that only Meteor Lake H series can have ARC certification, but you must have at least 16 gigabytes of dual channel RAM in your laptop? Do you think this actually does the opposite and that laptop OEMs won't meet these requirements just so they don't have to have an ARC branding on it? No, I don't think they'll do that. I think that's good. I think unless you have dual channel memory and you're allowing the APU to use at least 45 watts, that graphics card in it is going to graphics tile is going to perform significantly worse. I actually think that's good. And in fact, I kind of wish AMD had a check mark for Phoenix, Hawkpoint, and Strix that was like, this one won't screw over your integrated graphics. I think AMD's kind of done enough outreach where you don't see that often anymore. But I would certainly like that to be like a sticker that tells me on the laptop they didn't cheap out on a fundamental thing.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that that would be nice, but those stickers are ultimately just marketing material, so that would be perverted in a couple generations, like you see with G-Sync.
Yeah, and they would also like it only benefits the consumers, so why would they do that?
Exactly. It's a cynical take, I guess, but I think it's the reality.
Well, this is a cynical product. QH Freddy writes in and he says, do you think we can consider Meteor Lake's pitiful efficiency uplift to be irrefutable proof that Intel's nodes are actually doing great, but it's just their terrible microarchitectures that are stunting their competitiveness? Here's what I can tell you from my sources. Meteor Lake design people are not proud, and their contemporaries working on other products think they screwed up. At the same time, people at IFS are proud of Intel 4 and excited about Intel 3. So what I can tell you is people at Intel I talk to say it's the design team for the most part and not the node. But that's just me telling you that. A lot of people, certainly many of you on Reddit, would say that I might just make that up. I'm not, but you could say that. And so then I would say, well, from an outsider looking in, from an objective perspective, all we have is that there's no proof Intel 4 is good. Doesn't mean we know it's bad, but we have no proof that it's good, which if I was an investor, I would be freaking out right now because Pat just said, 5 nodes in 4 years. And if you're an investor, you might go, Intel, seems like your new node is worse than your previous one.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see a product not designed by Intel on Intel 4 as a comparison point to see how well it actually can perform. But, we just don't have that.
Mm-hmm. Coach Freddy writes in yet again and says, why do you think Intel is struggling so much with their microarchitectures, especially in the P-Core side? They basically haven't made any progress since Alder Lake, which was, 2021. They've basically gone around refreshing the same UARC over and over again, just like they did with Skylake, slapping a new name on it because they added some cash. I think there's something fundamentally wrong with the communication and the simulation teams at Intel. One of the major things I was told by Daniel Nenny that AMD gained by getting Xilinx and some of these other companies is they had really good FPGA simulation and really good hard implementation teams for working with foundries. I think this is something clearly Intel's struggling with, and their teams don't communicate well, as I said earlier in this episode. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Dan.
I mean, no, there's usually not a lot of discussion online about the simulation teams, but that intuitively makes sense to me that that might be the failure point more than anything.
Mm-hmm. And let's see here. Florida Man writes in, today's reviews seem to be lukewarm, but not scathing. They're getting more scathing the more come out, though. Will Hawkpoint reviewers be looking at AMD in a better light or more of the same or worse? What do you think, Dan?
I think the context in which any product is launched in is a major influence on on how people review it. So, and I think the context with AMD is that they're improving every year, and there's the knowledge that this is more of a stopgap generation. Mm-hmm. So I think the reviews for it will probably be some sort of, this isn't really that impressive of a product, but it's not intended to be 6 out of 10 or something like that. Where I think as time goes on, you're going to start seeing people talk about how the Meteor Lake products are, reviews were really, I think Intel or I don't know if Intel or OEM sent those products out for review. Were really an attempt by them to kind of pull a fast one on us by juicing up their other components.
Yeah, juicing up the components, only sending them to a handful of reviewers, almost seemingly avoiding specific reviewers who they know would probably point out some specific things, right?
Yeah.
So, go on.
Although I do think, I'm glad that the people that did get the reviews pointed out the shit that they were trying to pull on them.
Yeah. I mean, context matters, and I think when Hawkpoint comes out, it is, as always, it depends. Is it as good as some of the slides I showed kind of suggested it could be? Like where I saw some suggestion that maybe it's like 15% better or something, and multi-threading in some scenarios. I don't think it will equal that on average. It could be closer to 10%. Or is it going to be like 5%? And it's like, whoa, AMD really seems to have cherry-picked this. I don't know. But what I would say is no matter what, Intel fanboys are going to try to make Hawkpoint look bad now. Because they'll try to say, look, AMD's new generation isn't even that much better. How is this any different than Meteor Lake? And it'll be easier for them to make that ridiculous argument, because it's a refresh more so than a Centrino moment. It'll be harder for them to make that argument if it is like a solid 10% better. Like if Meteor Lake ups single threading at all, like 2% over Phoenix, or gasp 5%, if it ups multi-threading 10%, if integrated graphics get a solid on average 10% uplift, and then it also, this is what we still don't know and I haven't heard anything about yet, if Hawkpoint manages all of this and then surprise, it's actually also 20% more efficient or something at the same time, that's like the best case scenario, I would say. If all of that happens at once, I think it'd be very hard for it to get bad reviews, because you would have reviewers getting Hawkpoint and going, it beats Meteor Lake at everything already. And if that's the case, then the context won't need to be emphasized as much. It'll kind of just be twisting the knife. They'll just end the review. And this was just a refresh.
Yeah.
But if it is 5% better and there are still cherry picking moments where Meteor Lake is better, I think it'll get better reviews than Meteor Lake. But, this will be a Rorschach test for who's a fanboy. That's all it's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, if it's barely an improvement on Phoenix, I don't think there's that much of a reason to give it a great review. But if that's also happening, if they're also able to launch Strix Point within the same calendar year, I don't think it's that big of a deal, really.
But it'd be much easier to make that argument if it won across the board easily, and if it doesn't, some people will make the argument this is the same situation as Meteor Lake, forgetting, AMD took off a weekend and just put a sticker on Phoenix and clocked the AI engine hot faster, which is very different than what is the 3D stacking even doing in Meteor Lake? Like, I don't want to I think we should move on.
Yeah.
All right. So let me move on to story number 6. More buzz emerges suggesting a cheap upgrade for the PlayStation 5 Pro in 2024. All right, this one will be quick. More anonymous claims have been made on Reset Era forums regarding the potential specs of a PlayStation 5 Pro. And because both Tom Henderson is alleging dev kits are going out now, which means you'd expect this leak to happen now, and because Kepler on Twitter seems to have heard some similar things to the specs alleged, and I have heard at least some of them, not all of them as well, I think we should take these leaks seriously now. Basically, the PS5 Pro seems to be powered by a Zen 2 CPU on TSMC 4nm, clocked 26% faster than the PlayStation 5, have a full die that goes up to 60 compute units, but some of them will be disabled. The leak claims 56 compute units. I would have thought it would be 54, but I guess we'll see. And have CUs, compute units, that borrow from both RDNA 3 and RDNA 4 architectures for some sort of custom RDNA that's more advanced than what's in the PlayStation 5 base. And possibly have a custom neural processing unit dedicated to giving Sony some bespoke AI hardware accelerated upscaling like DLSS to hopefully deliver sharper 4K images while saving on performance. And also still use just 16 gigabytes of GDDR6, although clocked faster. This leak alleges 29% faster to 18 gigabit per second instead of 14. All of this, if true, would point to a console that doesn't need a more expensive board, doesn't need a more expensive chassis unless they want to, doesn't need more expensive cooling, and the same capacity of RAM shouldn't cost any more either. Might even cost less compared to what GDDR6 cost in 2020. And thus, potentially, this console, especially if they removed a disk drive, could cost $500 or certainly $600 or less. And thus, the idea, if this leak is true, which I'm not confirming everything in it because I haven't seen all of this myself, this would offer something that, with zero effort, leads to a 25 to 35% performance uplift. And remember, how many games now have unlocked frame rate options? Meaning, developers that do literally nothing, almost every game will at least get that boost to a locked, steady frame rate and higher dynamic resolution. And then, with minimal effort, the devs who put in just a little bit can probably boost performance 50 to 100% using the neural processing unit to boost the resolution without using as many teraflops to get there. And also, using like that, the extra compute units to boost it at least 50% more. You could probably see a lot of developers with minimal effort, almost double frame rates. And then with some efforts, I mean, look, if Naughty Dog uses everything in the custom RDNA architecture, the NPU, and everything else, you could see something over doubling performance in really specific scenarios. So that's what Sony's going for, something that, if we really break it down, it's almost just the silicon cost alone that makes this cost more. And the die could even be smaller based on what I'm seeing with how dense TSMC's node is. And if it is, they can kind of just double frame rates with the same cost to consumers, more or less. And then when you consider that GTA 5 sold 190 million units, more units of GTA 5 have been sold than I believe all Xbox consoles combined in sales. It would make a lot of sense why, even if Xbox doesn't release a mid-gen refresh this time, Sony should release a mid-gen refresh so that, because GTA 5 will not be launching to PC at first, they can claim best place to play Grand Theft Auto. Again, this is a game that has sold more units with its predecessor than all Xboxes combined, making sure your console is the best one to play it on.
And has a pretty big history with Sony at this point.
Yes, it does. Might already have a marketing deal. So if you're Sony and you know you have a marketing deal with Rockstar on GTA 6, and you know that this game could sell 100, 200, 300 million units, launching a PlayStation 5 Pro that at least lets you market you have the best way to play the game for a year straight, it'd be worth it to make the PS5 Pro for that alone.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think the PS5 was ever truly going to be a 4K console, and this isn't a 4K console either. I don't think it's probably a 1440p console though. And
think about it. Oh, sorry, go on.
Having more, having that frame that, and then having more games instead of having like the uncapped frame rates, they're just straight up 60 or 120 hertz locked, would be really nice. And I would really love to see no games have the 30 FPS thing at this point, but
minimum should be 40 frames per second variable refresh locked, right? Mm-hmm. Like for those TVs that support it, which a lot do now. I think that should be the minimum. And I think that's their goal. Is, I was talking to a GPU engineer, won't say which company, about this, and the person pointed out, because I said it seems really weird they wouldn't go to at least 20 gigabytes of RAM, even 18, something so you can fit in the extra VRAM for a higher resolution. This person said, yeah, if you want a higher resolution, but if you think about it, if you keep 16 gigabytes of RAM but double the compute performance, all developers know, I don't have to reprogram VRAM management, anything, which they all had to do for the Xbox One X, the PS4 Pro. All I have to do is say, this goes faster. I don't have to do anything. So that means all developers should buy into supporting this. Whereas with PS4 Pro, most did, but not all of them. And it was weird when they didn't, and annoying. Sony's spending the minimum amount of money, if this leak is true, not saying it necessarily is, to just get that little bit of better for the same price.
Yeah, and the only thing that would concern me about the pricing thing is at least the PS5 Slim doesn't suggest that Sony is convinced that they need to be very charitable with their pricing. But
no.
Hopefully they wouldn't. Well, I don't think that Sony will try to go for more than $600, but it would be very nice if this was
no chance.
If this was a soft price drop and like this would launch for like 500 or 550 or something, and the base model dropped to like 450 or 400 or something.
Honestly, gun up to my head, I think Sony's mostly just considering two scenarios. Xbox sales continue to collapse. They don't have to worry about anything. Price drops don't even help them. In that case, they keep the Slim at $450, and then they launch this for $550 without a disk drive. Worst case. Best case, they feel some pressure or they feel like they should go for it. Price drop the Slim to $400, drop this to $500 with no disk drive. But again, you can just buy the disk drive separately. That's kind of what I'm suspecting they're going to do, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be the worst scenario.
Let's see here. Well, it's that time of year again. The time of costumes, family, friends, and of course also eating lots of unhealthy candy and food. It's also simultaneously usually when most people are crunching to finish up the work they need to for the year before the holidays. And while you're crunching, that usually means you're also likely to eat other unhealthy foods in between those bouts of eating unhealthy food with family and friends. Well, that's of course unless you eat Vite Ramen. This piece of content is sponsored by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers tons of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, including new flavors like Radiant Crab Roux, and also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break that's sometimes away from home. Or they also have other healthy products like their Nano Boost powder that makes any food at least a little healthy. Click on the link in the description and use the offer code BROKENSILICON to get 10% off a variety of products from Vite Ramen, like special bundles for Moore's Law's Dead fans, raw nudes if you want to make up your own recipes with their noodles, and other food products, powders, and utensils, and more. They really are a plucky small startup that has been really good to Moore's Law is Dead for years now, and I also genuinely like their product. So if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead, try Vite Ramen, and just clicking on that link in the description really helps a ton, but buying their product and using the offer code Broken Silicon, of course, helps the channel even more. Try Vite Ramen today. UH Freddy writes in, oh no, wait, before I get to his reader mail, I did want to say one more thing about this too that I just realized. The only thing that would concern me about keeping the same amount of VRAM, because again, if all you're doing is increasing frame rate, you'll have a better architecture. You'll even gain a little bit of VRAM because there's better memory compression in later RDNA models. So you'd actually maybe gain, if in a dynamic resolution, it's not going to be 50% higher. It might be 20% higher at a higher frame rate. That's enough for Sony. The only thing that would concern me is the rumor that it is way, way, way better at ray tracing. If that's the case, ray tracing takes up a lot of VRAM. Having said that, I just realized now while we're talking, yeah, but any company implementing ray tracing probably is the technological chaps to use that neural engine, right? If they do, then that means they can probably actually run it at a lower base resolution and then Sony DLSS it up to 4K. Because if you look at when NVIDIA GPUs use DLSS or even AMD with FSR, you can see like they gain like a gigabyte of RAM or something. Maybe that's all Sony's thinking is, yeah, so if you're going to use ray tracing, use the neural engine to save on VRAM. That's cheaper than us adding more RAM. And any company that thinks it's too hard to check a box in the INI file and let the NPU take over with resolution probably isn't putting ray tracing in their game.
Yeah, that's true.
That's the one thing I could think of in their defense, if this leak is true. QH Freddy writes and he says, hi, Tom, can you shed some light on why you believe it makes sense for the PlayStation 5 Pro to update the graphics architecture from RDNA 1 Plus to RDNA 3 Plus? Well, I don't like when people say RDNA Plus, but I guess I'm noticing you're saying RDNA 1 Plus, so you're saying above RDNA 1 to above RDNA 3. Okay. But not make such an update on the CPU beyond simply being faster. And you say Zen 2 is adequate. I would have expected it to be easier for devs to be able to manage a change in the CPU architecture than a change in the GPU architecture, given that most architecture-specific optimizations happen on the GPU side, while CPU optimizations are, for the most part, architecture agnostic. If anything, the move to a newer Zen, the single CCX would be easier for devs to accommodate, since they can just feed it the same code and not have to worry about the cache being partitioned or whether they are getting bottlenecks on memory latency. With a small and fast core, and can instead just let their higher IPC cores do their thing. There's a few reasons they would go with Zen 2, which I outlined in the video analyzing this. Zen 2 has the least amount of transistors per core between Zen 2, Zen 3, Zen 4. So if they die shrink Zen 2 to Zen 4, even if they clock it, they die shrink Zen 2 to TSMC 4 nanometer, even if they clock it faster, it's going to take up, I mean, we're talking about like Intel E-core die space here. Nothing, so that allows them to save money. That allows them to be a little bit that much easier, right? So if you're someone at Sony and you're like, oh, so this would just take up less space, make it easier for us to sell this at $500 if we need to, then the Sony person would go, do we need a stronger CPU? And everyone would say no. Because you have to remember that most Zen 2 CPUs, when you go look at a benchmark and you see Zen 2, and by the way, almost always it's above 100 hertz and it's like always above 60 hertz. So let's just call it right there. Zen 2 is strong enough for 60 hertz gaming, which is the overwhelming majority of these console titles. And it's usually enough for 120 hertz. Most of the time, all core boost for Zen 2 is like 4 gigahertz. Like my 3950X, which I don't have anymore, I remember with 16 cores, it usually had most of the cores at like 4.1 and then some at 4.2, a few at 4.3 or 4 if I was lucky. Maybe if it was really lightly threaded, I'd blink and see 4.7 gigahertz. If this actually runs all of the cores, even above 4.2 gigahertz on average, this is the fastest all-core boost Zen 2 on planet. All of those benchmarks you're seeing of Zen 2, add 5 to 10%. That's enough. Right, that's the major reason they would do this. Now, having said, why would it be hard for its backwards compatibility? And I have talked to people that worked on the AMD APU in the PS5. They said there were slight tweaks around the die of their version of Zen 2. There are things they stripped out of their version of Zen 2 for more consistent thermal loads across the die, for saving a tiny bit on die space. It is a custom version of Zen 2 that they spent a lot of money on. And part of the customizations were keeping backwards compatibility to the metal with Jaguar and PS4. I saw some people, and I say this, Dan, because I saw some people in the Moore's Law Z Discord talking about how, like, what could it, I'm telling you, people at AMD say there are things that could get borked in backwards compatibility. Would they be crazy easy things to account for? Probably, but Sony wants it to be to the metal compatible. If you disagree with me, I mean, you know what, man? Go work at AMD because that's what they're telling me, and you must be smarter than them. But like, you can, if you say you don't believe me, you say you don't believe me. But there are tiny things they think could go wrong in remote scenarios with backwards compatibility. It is remote, but not be most of the time. If they can save money making it smaller, why bother?
And I mean, I think there's just something to be said that when you look at especially the new design history for consoles. The CPU architecture is usually less important than what's going into the GPU because the consoles are just inherently lightly threaded by the way their nature. So,
but again,
I don't have multiple tabs of Google Chrome open while I'm playing on my PS5 while I'm playing a video game or something.
Yeah, well, and this gets also into like the PlayStation 5 is a bunch of co-processors that handle all these other tasks for loading assets. And I mean, so it's just not even the same as like it's not even an apples to apples of Zen 2 on desktop because it can't be. It's just a fundamentally different environment where they're getting more bang from their buck out of the CPU. And again, I saw some people on Twitter and like, oh, if it's Zen 2, this will hold back this graphics card massively. And I'm like, in what fucking game? What game, dude? Like I even looked up Microsoft Flight Simulator. And like at lower resolutions, like 1080p, and by the way, this game isn't even on PlayStation. It was holding, even in like crazy demanding scenarios where you turn up all the effects at high res, it was like 45, 50 frames per second or something. I don't even remember if that was possibly just bottlenecked by the GPU. And if you go to lower resolutions, it's well above 100, I thought. Well, not maybe well above, but it can even get there. And this isn't even a game on there. Every other game I look at, I don't see a single game where it's hard to run at 60 hertz. And I saw people in the comments too that were just like, they definitely can't run 120 hertz with every game with a fast clock Zen 2. Yeah, so what? Yeah, 10% of the games that run at 60. I don't think the developer will care. But the games like a Borderlands that can account for that and run it, they will, and that'll be easier, So this is taking the same CPU, which already can generally run 60 hertz easily. Anytime you're seeing it lower than that, it's almost always because of the GPU or a dev forked scheduling. It's now 30% faster. That's enough to hold 60. And if it can't hold 120, then the dev will make the game target 60.
So, I mean, looking at the 7700X review from TechSpot, they feature the 3700X in their review. And it's getting 142 frames per second on average in 1080p. That's, I think, enough for whatever this console is trying to accomplish.
Right. And again, That's a system without the coprocessors. That's a system that's not programmed as much to the metal. That's a system that probably isn't running all-core boosts as high as this console allegedly will. Again, I can't back up the leak 100% or something like that. But so that's why. And again, takes up less die space, requires less design costs, not even worth their time. If even 1 out of 100 games could have a minor glitch because they went to a new architecture, it's not holding it back. They're not going to bother, QH Freddy. Compressor Earthblocks writes, and it says, Tom and Dan, there's a lot of A's in the Dan. Are you guys excited for the PlayStation 5 Pro and presumably waiting till 2027 or 2028 for a next-gen console? Or would you rather have them not release the Pro and drop the next gen in 2025 or 2026? I think it comes down to what they could launch in 2026. Like, if they felt they could launch a $600 console, which inflation, I think we have to accept PS6 probably gonna be $600. I don't think they'll go for $700. I think $600 though. If they launch a $600 console, if they could in 2026 or something that had RDNA 5, Zen 6, and did ray tracing, I still think it's too early to try to make it a full ray tracing console to the degree of like everything fully path traced, but it could do it when it needs to. And it could be a generational uplift with all of the new storage tech we want. Yeah, I would have rather that come out in 2025 or 2026. Now, if Sony's conclusion, though, is we're not going to get the uplift we need to feel like a new experience until 2027, yeah, I get it. Why bother? This is enough to keep running the image quality people will want, the way people want it for a long time. And it's funny because the argument for why you do a new gen sooner actually works against itself. It just depends how you look at it. If your argument is, well, you know, you could just do a new generation sooner and then it'll feel like a bigger uplift, then, but I could also make it the other way around and go, but like, is it going to feel like a new one if it's sooner? And if it isn't, why do it sooner? Right.
Yeah, I mean, just extending out the generation for another like 3 or so years by introducing stronger consoles halfway through.
For those who want it, a lot of people say they're perfectly happy.
I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. The people that are really dedicated will go and buy it again, buy your new console again. But I think a lot of the people, you have to look at how the sales of these things work. Most people, a lot of people at least, wait until the mid-gen period to buy the console anyways. And if you're doing that and you're trying to make your console like console cycle 5 or 6 years instead of 7, 8, or 9 years, I think a lot of people will just start ending up entirely skipping one generation every once in a while, which they don't want to happen.
Right. And yeah, again, it's like, yeah. If
I also don't think Sony wants to do a ton of investment in R&D
true.
This often.
Right, exactly. Well, and you know, so I would also say that we have to just acknowledge that a major reason they would do this console refresh is what we will now be talking about in story number 7. GTA 6 announced and the details keep trickling out. So yeah, the GTA 6 trailer got leaked and then properly released early to make up for the leak. And the people lost their minds. I mean, from my perspective, the graphics look amazing. This is going to be the biggest launch, I think, in gaming history. Hence why Sony would want to launch a Pro console half a year or so to a year before it comes out. And I really isn't surprising it's not coming to PC immediately. And yeah, I guess I think the game looks amazing. I'm going to guess there's some things about this game we just don't even know yet. That always happens with these games. Like, remember, with GTA 5, I believe at the reveal we didn't even know there'd be 3 different characters. Oh no, we know that right away.
I actually don't remember anymore. I thought that was because that was a really big central part of the marketing, that you play 3 characters now, to the point that I think was an assumption that GTA 6 you'll play as multiple characters too, or at least 2 characters, which that's what it appears they're doing. It looks like they're doing the Bonnie and Clyde type thing. And I'm guessing you're going to play as Bonnie and Clyde, but
yeah. So, but there's usually always some surprises to like mechanics in the games that we don't know about. So we don't know if there is a 3rd or 4th character. We don't know how much the characters are together. I would say at a minimum, we can assume there's 2 and it is, you switch between them, which makes a ton of sense, by the way. I think putting this in Florida in 2023 is like the best location. You can have, you know, you can pull from both the rural and urban divide a Latina woman, a white boy. Perfect. There's so many stories, so many clashes there. You can tell. Also, Grand Theft Auto is goofy. Let's put this thing in Florida, man. Let's get a guy, doing drugs, getting eaten by an alligator. Well, good old boy shoots an AR-15 out at drug smugglers coming in submarines. I mean, this is the perfect location for a 2020, I guess, 5 Grand Theft Auto. I can't think, and this is an not up and coming, but this is a city that's growing rapidly right now. If you think about when they did, I said this to you in GTA 4, this is when New York was the hottest city, in LA. Now it's these other up and coming cities that are smaller but growing rapidly. Miami's one of them. Perfect place to put the new Grand Theft Auto.
And Tom, it's legally not Miami. It's Vice.
Oh, I know. But that makes sense because then they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah, and then you have the, crazy stories that are seemingly always emerging out of Florida that they can go with. And I saw this. You've probably seen this guy before, the Joker rapper with a bunch of Joker.
Andrew Callahan covered him, right? Yeah.
He's threatening to sue Rockstar for stealing his likeness, which I think is pretty funny.
Was it in the trailer? I didn't even see him.
There's a guy that's clearly based off of the apparently myriad of Joker rappers in Florida.
Right. So which one? Exactly. We have to put this game in Florida. That should be a mission. A fight between different Joker rappers. I mean, come on.
Actually, that would be pretty funny.
I mean, again, these missions will write themselves in the location and main characters and settings they chose.
Yeah,
write themselves. I mean, I guess in terms of a hardware perspective, the question will be frame rate. But I will say the trailer, it looked like they weren't covering anything up. Backgrounds looked a little blurry. It looked beautiful, but it wasn't perfect. That makes me go, I would suspect what they're targeting on PlayStation 5 base is hopefully hovering around 40 frames per second, but that's what it is. And you can either cap it at 40 VRR or let it run all over the place. And there will also be a 30 hertz mode. And then the Pro runs it at 60 at a little higher res. That's my guess. But I don't know. That's my guess. I would say to cap this at 30 would be a huge mistake.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I would actually say it's just fundamentally a mistake because we live in a world where there's new consoles, backwards compatibility, and x86. Even just for the Xbox, if they launch another console, let them uncap the frame rate. So when they get the new console, you can uncap the frame rate. So I would say that's the one. That was such a mistake with Red Dead Redemption 2.
And I know this was the very, very tail end of the PS3 generation when GTA 5 first came out. But that game ran so sluggishly on the PS5 at points.
PS3.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, PS3 at points. That I hope they don't remind us with bad frame rates on the new game too.
Yeah, and you also have to think GTA 5 has sold apparently, at least what I saw, over 190 million copies. That's just insane. But what that means is it's a mainstream esports game practically. It's not esports, but it's to that level of popularity GTA Online is. I'm just going to say it, people. They would, and you can tell from the art style, it's not trying to cross the uncanny valley. It's going even, actually, I would argue, slightly more cartoonish than GTA 5. So if you can see that, they're probably trying to make sure it can run on as many systems as possible when it does launch on PC. That'd be my suspicion here.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Although I don't know what it's going to look like on the Series S. I think that is one where they're just going to be like, it runs how it runs. That I don't know how you're going to.
I don't know how they're going to get
on a 10 gigabyte console.
600p 20 FPS. I don't know.
But hopefully what they will do is, they just want it to run on as many devices when it finally launches on PC as possible. Hopefully what they will decide, I mean, they'd be dumb to not try to make it able to run on the Switch too. What I would hope that, and the Steam Deck, I mean, come on. What I'd hope they would do is, hey, it's a dynamic resolution. It kind of, sometimes it almost looks like Harry Potter on the Switch, but oh well. But it's a dynamic res from 480p to 720p or something, upscaled on Xbox Series S, and it's close to 60 hertz. And if you want to run it in 1440p, 30 hertz mode is there. And then because of that, it also runs it above 1080p 60 hertz on the consoles with a dynamic res. I think it'd be such a huge mistake if they went to 30 hertz. A lot of people are saying it will. All I'll say is that would be a dumb move, especially when GTA 5 was this successful. You want to make sure this runs on as many pieces as possible when it comes out. XTX999 writes in and says, hello, Tom and Dan. GTA 6, what are your thoughts? It looks incredible to me, and I can't help but think that the final product will look like the trailer on console because of the aliasing and imperfections. Well, it did look really good. What they achieved with physics, it wasn't perfect, they didn't try to handle, but that's something that, of course, I could be wrong about. What do you think the performance will be? Oh, so we just answered his question. So there you go, XTX. Listen to the last 5 minutes. Alrighty, well, let us now move on to the wrap-up. These are the final stories we would like to discuss at least a little bit, but they're not, big enough to get their own section. So the first one I have here is the Xbox Series X had its price dropped to $400, and I guess what the Series S technically then also got its price dropped to $240, or the 512 gigabyte version did. The only thing I really have to point out is it's interesting how they say it's a temporary price drop to $400. All I can say is all of these recent reports that Xbox sales are completely collapsing. It even seems to be showing up in AMD's earnings for semi-custom sales falling apart. That maybe what Microsoft is doing is calling it temporary so they can go
make it permanent if they have to.
Yeah, if sales explode, they let it go back and then decide on a next plan. If they get good, but not enough that they think they can go back up, then they go, let's keep it at 400. That's what I think is actually the middle is where they would keep it permanent. Like if sales explode wildly, they know this is too low. They should drop it to 450. If sales don't get any better, then I don't know. They might just keep it at 500 because there's no point in raising the price. But if they go up enough, but not completely, that's where they go, well, this is what the price should be. That's what I think the temporary thing is about. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about Xbox having a price drop.
No.
Also, and it's funny when you told me this, I think you texted me or something, Naughty Dog's The Last of Us factions being canceled. I thought it already was. I told you, it wasn't already. I mean, we've been sitting around here this long waiting for this frickin' thing that was supposed to be a launch game, according to my sources. And now, I don't know if you have anything to say about it, but it's like, I'd say 6 months ago, it seemed like it was at least 50-50 it was going to be.
Well, yeah, the one thing I will have to say is, a couple thoughts. One, this is kind of stuff does, and like the news that like they've cut a bunch of staff at Naughty Dog does make me a little bit nervous that Naughty Dog is dysfunctional, which is one of my favorite studios. That makes me a bit nervous. And
yeah, or maybe just to play devil's advocate, although this isn't really against what you're saying. Maybe they look at what happened with, what was it, Dreams from Media Molecule, and they're like, we're not letting that happen again. Little Big Planet was a decent moneymaker for Sony, and they just putzed around for like a decade. And maybe they're like, hey, we're going to turn the screws a little bit anytime they seem dysfunctional, because it has to be made clear you can't pull a Dreams. Yeah.
And the other thing I hope is that this is probably being overly optimistic, but they said we've stopped development on it, which reads more like the game is on ice than it's completely canceled. So hopefully there's some type of revival of it at some point. But hell, that might not even, it might just make sense to launch it with The Last of Us 3 at a certain point.
Oh, I never even thought about that, because there are rumors they're working on The Last of Us 3, and perhaps they have the core of what they need for it already, and they're like, let's launch it as a standard multi. We've taken too long. We're not in the pocket. We missed it. We missed our shot. So let's take
The Last of Us came out 3.5 years ago, I think, at this point.
Yeah, so who knows? Maybe in 2025, 6, they even might have The Last of Us 3. I doubt it, but maybe. And if they do, they're like, same engine. Let's just make it part of The Last of Us Part 3.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to guess, I would guess there's a different franchise in between The Last of Us 2 and 3 that Naughty Dog will make first, but who knows? Maybe they are just going straight to another game. I mean, another sequel.
Yeah, that I never considered that aspect of it, of like, if it's not going to be its own game and it's launching this far away from the other ones, our options are strip it down and launch it with The Last of Us Part 2 remake, or save it for a true sequel. That actually makes some sense to me. We'll see. Disappointed. I wanted to run around and shoot clickers with you and our friends, but I guess not. And it makes you feel so stupid too. It's like, so you assholes, you should have just launched a multiplayer mode with it. I would have played it, but whatever. E3 is permanently canceled, Dan. I mean, in a slower news week, turns out there's actually a lot to talk about this week. This would have been its own story.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's a huge story because, E3 has been a staple of the gaming community for an incredibly long time now. But on the other hand, it's like, well, E3 was kind of killed in 2020 anyways. And
right, it's like someone who's like in a coma isn't going to make it much longer. You can say it's canceled now, but didn't it die 5 years ago? I mean,
yeah, it's kind of like pulling the plug more than anything, or it's like we're confirming what you all knew was going to happen at some point anyways.
Mm-hmm. I saw this thing that there's a secret overclocking fuse, though I guess it's not secret because AMD said it publicly, in Threadripper 7000. I saw a lot of people complaining about this fuse. So apparently you can tell if you change clock settings and it blows a inconsequential fuse inside the chip. But that way, if AMD ever wanted to know, they could know if you overclocked Threadripper. Okay. Although AMD publicly said this doesn't void your warranty to overclock. We just know for trial and error if we had to repair one. QH Freddy writes in and says, well, I understand AMD not wanting to provide warranty support for overclocked chips. Well, they said they will. It feels like they really went overboard on Threadripper to make a fuse-based overclock detection that covers even raising the power limits of the chip. Not only that, but it appears to cover X1 XMP usage as well. With this in mind, what is even the point of Threadripper, in particular TRX50 for me? At least it completely cements my opinion that you should just buy Epic. Well, I'd say there's somewhat of an argument there for that. But I believe, let me see here. Let's see. Yeah, so I have some notes written down here. Like AMD already voids warranties for issues that are a result of overclocking. But if something breaks and they look and they're like, this wasn't overclocking, then it's not an issue. So I don't know. To me, this just seems like a Q&A thing that they put on the chip, and they admitted it publicly. So I actually don't see the big deal here. I think the Epic argument is just a separate conversation, just because of how expensive 30%. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this.
No, not really. I mean, I think I'm mostly with you, unless the only counter is if that's a disingenuous take from AMD, and they're actually going to they're going to be very liberal about pointing to OC as a reason that the chip broke.
Yeah. I don't know, but I thought I've also heard that this has been like a standard thing for a while too in a lot of products. So honestly, my opinion, a lot of people want an outrage article, and I just don't care to talk about it.
I mean, what I'll say is in the past, there's always talk about overclocking voiding your warranty, and I've definitely RMA'd overclocked things before.
Right, and they're worried. Well, now maybe you can't, but until there's evidence that is even a thing, I don't have any outrage because they say it's not an issue. All right. So also I saw, I don't really need to talk about this much, but that the Turin diagrams that I leaked, look, Dan, they just showed up yet again. They look exactly the same as the one leaked by Moore's Law is Dead. So I don't have much to add to this. Like looking through here, I think we got confirmation of 512 megabytes of L3 cache. I don't remember if I said that number specifically, but we've known the cache core counts of Zen 5. I don't really see anything here new. It kind of is just repackaged stuff that I've already leaked. But it is nice to see that. And I do think that this is probably from a separate source that Yuki shared. So it's just, I think, interesting to see the same stuff shared, yet again. And so there you go. We know for sure what Turin is. If all of the roadmaps and diagrams out of this channel weren't enough, here they are again. And we actually have pictures of the CPU itself. Although it's not delidded, that's what I would have wanted to see, because otherwise when I look at the, well,
all you can really take away from that is it's very big.
And it looks like Genoa. That's really the new thing, is a picture of it, but it looks like Genoa though. Let me see here. There are rumors that some of the Ryzen 8000G models, so the Zen 4 APUs coming to AM5, actually some of them might use Hawk Point.
Yeah, that's
All I can
interesting.
say is there was more said in this article, but I don't think any of it's really new. Is if that's true, it wouldn't surprise me if they're doing both. If like the models they launch at first, most of the volume is Phoenix to get rid of laptop Phoenix while Hawkpoint launches,
And then they launch another thing above it or something.
yeah, and they have it at launch. Like they technically are using Hawkpoint at launch, but maybe they don't have a lot of volume for the best models. And then once Hawkpoint starts to get replaced by Strix to a certain degree, that's when all of a sudden the 8800Gs are, widely available on desktop. That'd be my suspicion. We also have AMD releases source code for FSR 3. I don't have anything to add to this. I just think it's a big deal that they're open sourcing it more and more. There's rumors of them working with other companies. I think this is the way you make FSR 3
that's always
a
good.
success. And apparently we have here a link to something we already talked about, so I won't even mention it there. But all right, that is the wrap up. Let me now get to let me write just one thing.
Actually, there's one more thing I'll throw in. I saw that the 7800 X3D is now selling for $320. So
I believe it was $340 though, or $350. Like
they dropped it 12 days ago, and it's dropped further.
Right. So, is it just get this?
Yes, that's all.
Well, I mean, go to the last loose ends, people. Links in that description for Micro Center deals. And I just want to point this out. I just think this is worth pointing out, because I think a lot of people right now are talking about, should we wait for Zen 5 or should we get Zen 4 now? And I would say, well, it depends which chip you want. Because if you just want a solid gaming chip and you want to build a desktop now to play over Christmas, I have to point out that at Micro Center, at least at Micro Center, the 7800 X3D is $329 and comes with 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000 for free. So if your question is, should I wait for Zen 5 or get Zen 4 now? Do you think there's a chance AMD is going to launch the 9700 X8 core for like 150 or something? Because even if it's stronger, this is going to be probably similar gaming performance, if not a little worse, for half the cost overall, because it comes with not 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes of DDR5 6000. So I would actually argue that as long as you're not trying to get something really specific here, you just want a good gaming system, go to the links in the description to the last Loose Ends episode, and then get a 7800 X3D with what is that? Like $120 of RAM at least for free. And then you have AM5 and you can upgrade to Zen 6, because I don't think Zen 5 is going to give you any gaming performance you couldn't get out of this right now for less money.
Yeah.
But yes. So mad at you for interrupting me, Dan, but thank you for letting me point that out to people. All right. Let us move on to the final reader mails. XTX999 writes in and says, can we take a moment to finally see the fruits of Xbox's acquisitions? Finally sprouting. I forgot Hellblade 2 was even a thing when I saw its trailer, and I had the biggest, oh yeah, that exists moment in a while. Blade from Arcane, I find I'm meeting with so much skepticism. Arcane seems to have lost a few cylinders in the engine as of late, but we'll see what they pull off. Also, as a rare Death Stranding enjoyer, interested in what Jordan Peele and Kojima are cooking. Yeah, well, I think that's more so, well, that'd be more of a measure, I would say, of if Xbox's acquisitions, or not even acquisitions.
That's not an acquisition. That's just a deal.
Microsoft's funding actually does, but since it's not an acquisition, I have no reason to believe this Jordan Peele Kojima game wouldn't work. I just want to point out they didn't say exclusive, I believe, in the trailer for this Kojima game. So I'm going to just say it, guys. I think there's a good chance that's on PlayStation. So, and we will see Xbox Studios pop up on PlayStation, just like I believe we see PlayStation Studios pop up for MLB The Show. But it doesn't look like nothing. And so this isn't part of Intel's acquisition sprouting anything, but this is a separate thing they're funding that isn't an acquisition. But looked like nothing since they showed nothing, of course, but I'll keep my eyes on it. What were your thoughts from the Game Awards? I've never played Baldur's Gate 3, never will, but it won. Can we all agree that Golem and Kong got robbed? Now, Golem was one of those ones where I was like 50-50, this is a disaster, or it's going to be a surprise, interesting idea. Well, disaster is the answer on that, but I actually didn't watch the Game Awards, Dan. What'd you...
Oh, yeah. I mean, to bring up like all the games he mentioned, Hellblade 2, I'm skeptical of, but like hopefully it's good. I thought the first game was really good, but it's a self-contained story, and I kind of think that when they bought, why can't I remember, Ninja Theory, they kind of forced them into making another game, a sequel to a game that doesn't demand a sequel. And then, of course, I'm a gigantic fan of Kojima and Jordan Peele, so I'm
Very excited.
very excited for that. And I'm hoping the development cycle for that is shorter because it seems like it's a smaller game. And then as far as like the Game Awards went, I mean, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3 yet. I'm planning on playing Baldur's Gate 3 at some point and winning Game of the Year. I actually pushed that up in my line of games I want to play. I will say, though, apparently online, there were a bunch of people complaining that Spider-Man 2 specifically didn't win, which I thought was interesting.
As someone who hasn't played the second Spider-Man, the previous two are in my backlog. I own them. I just haven't played them nearly enough. And also hasn't played Baldur's Gate, so my opinion should matter pretty close to zero on which one gets Game of the Year. Controversial opinion, I feel like Baldur's Gate did something newer, so... Spider-Man's supposedly, and played it, a great game that's impressive, does a good job, everyone loves it, but is it new? Baldur's Gate I know it's a sequel, but when did the last one come out and this did something really well that's more unique? And as someone who's, by the way, I'm more likely to play the next Spider-Man than Baldur's Gate, I can still see an argument for why that should get Game of the Year because it achieved something.
Well, yeah, and it's a sequel, but Baldur's Gate, the last numbered Baldur's Gate game was, I think, in 2000 or something. So Baldur's Gate 2.
It's not really, I mean, it's a sequel, but come on.
I just thought it was funny online, like comments like, how did an indie game that no one's ever heard of beat Spider-Man 2? And it's like... Well,
first of all, why should that matter?
This isn't an indie game. It was developed by a team of 400 people, and it sold like 30 million copies or something. This is pretty far from an indie game, but
yeah. My argument makes sense, right? Again, someone who hasn't played either game, which one was a newer idea?
It's a more unique game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
and they're both good. So I would defer and give it to the more unique game if both games are good.
I agree. And then I'd say for Hellblade, the one thing you might say though is Alan Wake 2 seems to have turned out very, very well. True. Hellblade might as well be. I mean, none of us thought we needed a sequel to Alan Wake. Although I will say, it's easier for me to see the Alan Wake sequel because it was more. It was more of an action game, I think, than Hellblade actually was. Than seeing the point of a Hellblade sequel, but it turned out well. So why can't Hellblade?
Yeah, it's just Hellblade is honestly, as far as gameplay goes, it's a step above a walking simulator, though, and it's arguably entirely going on in a person's head. I wouldn't say arguably, like that's what the narrative points to it being. So the idea that there's an action game sequel to that game is just weird to me. But I hope it's good.
I agree. I agree. It's weirder than Alan Wake 2.
Yeah.
To think of it being a sequel, but because Alan Wake 2 did well, I guess we'll just see. I agree with you on that. And then again, we're excited for the Kojima thing. But again, if that turns out well, that's not an Xbox acquisition. Big Jeff B writes in, "Hey, Tom and Dan, I've seen this story from China, this wild crossfire-like kind of thing where they tricked a system into using DLSS 3 frame gen and AMD frame generation at the same time. Daniel Owen did a story on it on his channel, apparently, and they joked up a 4090 and had it as the output, but also had a 66. I think it was a 6600 was the output or something. But the 4090 ran the game, and like they had another card in there or something that tricked AMF.
Yeah,
or was it something like that? I mean, I looked into it. It's interesting. It does make you wonder how many things you could stack on top of each other with enough hardware, though. I do think it is worth pointing out something, though, like. I think sometimes people talk about, well, I've got my 4090 for gaming with ray tracing, and then like my AMD chip for this and my Intel chip for encoding that. And at a certain point, you just go, good for you, but you do understand most people aren't going to get Threadripper or like crazy HED workstation versions of AM5 so they can run thousands of dollars, or like multiple graphics cards all putting out heat. Not necessarily thousands of dollars for the graphics card. Depends on, these are cheaper ones. Well, one of them is. But, so it's like, this doesn't really surprise me, but it's like, you could have done a ton of things to trick hardware in the past. I think people tricked like a PhysX card into working with this, but most people don't want to have to own multiple graphics cards. And from what I saw from the testing, the frame pacing issue is like crazy. So it's interesting.
And you just have to like think about it at a certain point. So this thing is using DLSS and 2 different forms of frame gen. That means like 1 out of like every 10 pixels that's being displayed is actually in engine.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, I imagine doing this would feel terrible.
Dead Eyes 117 writes in, with your unique position of having relatively deep knowledge and insight on the development of new hardware, well, thank you, I suppose. What do you think will be the next big thing when the new console generation comes around? Like the big talking points they use to try to sell the tech? I'm thinking back on things like the original Xbox having DirectX shaders, PS3 cell processor, current gen's ray tracing and advanced storage hardware. Well, it's more than that. Any thoughts on what the hype will focus on with a potential PlayStation 6 or Xbox, whatever the hell they decide to call it? My bet is they double down on ray tracing and they try to brand as bringing path tracing to consoles. Probably some of that. But, I'd say that, that's not like, that's going to be like saying it has this shader thing. It's not, I don't think it's going to be all ray tracing. And a neural engine to run things like local LLM style programs for NPCs.
I would say neural engines are going to be the big marketing thing.
Yeah, I honestly think that, especially after talking to the guest, which I will, put a plug in here for the last guest episode of Broken Silicon, where I talked to an AI developer, who's working on stuff that is intended to be used in games. He really opened up my eyes to like some of the more fundamental things you could do with AI in games. I think me and you, Dan, were talking about, well, you could have it like create things and videos instantly from situations. So it's not like the developer has to program 10 different outcomes to your decisions while you play the game and then make a news thing on a thing. Oh, this bank was robbed instead of this one. The neural engine can literally know everything that happened and update it like that and make a small video. That type of stuff me and you were already talking about. What he pointed out is there could be a new Elder Scrolls where instead of having 4 different options, you just type what you want to say to the person and it understands it. And then you say, hey, can you help me attack this village at night? I want to steal from this person. The AI can go, I hate that guy too. Let's do it. And they never thought to put that in the game. That is something that's plausible here.
And a thing that immediately comes to mind is I remember when I was playing the first Red Dead Redemption, there's like newspapers you can read throughout the game. And I always thought it would be interesting if like your actions influence, like not like the actions you do in missions, but like just the random shit you do while playing the game. Like you just randomly walk and like, I don't know, murder stagecoaches. And like, it would be really cool if like an AI generated article came up like
the East Side Killer.
Yeah, like stagecoach robberies are on the rise or something like that.
Yeah, not just that, but they could say one woman was gunned down at 12 a.m. Like they could actually say. Now, the problem with putting that in the game would be at what point do you have suspension of disbelief? Because I think me and you both know, Dan, when I play the single player, I tend to play it close to how I would in real life. But when I play online, that's where the wheels just come off and it's like, yeah, today let's be a jerk to someone. Like, I don't know, let's try to rob this bank, steal this guy's car in GTA 5 online. But, I think a lot of people play most games like that. They'll play Red Dead Redemption, and for this day they were trying to play it like a cowboy, but then the next day they're like, I'm just going to see if I can murder this town and see what happens. And how do you have the AI? You'd have to be very careful with gating and decisions. Like the game goes, just so you know, this stuff you did today is going to fundamentally change your single player experience forever. So do you want us to delete this part of the save, or are you keeping it? Like, you're going to have the game maybe actively ask you that, and then also just decide not to count certain things you do by guessing you didn't want us to count that. That's for the best experience. Because, like you said, if you're someone who plays the game and it's like you're trying to save your family, win over a girl, and have your father love you again. I don't know what the game is, but then also you've killed 1,000 people that you didn't need to. Like, all the newspapers are going to say, godlike serial killer murders another town. And that's the story now. Doesn't matter what Dutch is doing. What's mattering is there seems to be a demigod killing villages. That no one cares about Dutch. So, like, how you program that into the game is going to be a big deal.
Yeah, or like the FBI begins actively hunting you or something.
Yeah, they're he was here at this amount of time, and they never stop. You killed 1,000 people. You're not losing their track.
True.
Especially say a game like GTA 6, where it's supposed to be in a modern world where there's the internet. We keep really good records of things. That's the type of stuff. But that's what I think's going to be next gen. I think it's going to be like, right now, the ease of use, smoothness is what makes it feel next gen. Whenever I see a game run at 30 frames, I'm like, dude, the number one thing is this 60 frames per second, decent image quality, loads in a second or 5 seconds usually stuff. Like, that is what feels next. And you boot up a PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, it's just painful to do anything, takes minutes to load things. Go play Harry Potter on the Switch. You have to load for like a minute every time you fart or walk 10 feet. Next gen right now is no loading, 60 frames. I think next gen, it is going to be more of that. Now, the load times, if they use some kind of like third tier cache memory that, like CXL type thing, I mean, you could make load times literally gone, but right now they're pretty close to gone. I like to invade people at night on Demon Souls, because I played the game like 10,000 hours, so I know every square foot of that game. And it's not instant, but like, it's kind of close enough to instant load times. And it's not 4K, but it's pretty good resolution. I do think I think it'll be more of a smoothness thing again, but the AI aspect of just how dynamic games are, that's next gen. Like, you can't make this game on the last title. Right now, it's the storage isn't fast enough really to make the game work. Next gen, it's going to be, you just can't even play some types of games. All right. Well, I think that's going to do it for this episode. Dan, any final thoughts?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, as always, I will say thank you for watching, listening. Remember to like, share, subscribe to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. We're almost about to cross another 1,000 threshold again. Help us get there. It does help with the algorithm. It does help me negotiate better with advertisers. There were a couple over this holiday season where it just didn't end up working with them because I just thought they were too intrusive. The more subscribers I have, the more they're just going to not argue. And this is what allows me to pay Carbon Cry, Dan, a renderer, to make some stuff that I actually haven't even shown that much yet, by the way. Like, and do these special leaks, like of Titans early and stuff. Like, all of this, Gerard, it's only possible because we keep gaining subscribers, and because we have a Patreon. So please join us on the Patreon as well. New Die Shrink just came out talking about what we think about Intel's future in Arrow Lake and all of that. One came out about AM5 and LGA 1851 longevity. Do not miss those. Just $2 a month gets you access to those and hundreds of other episodes without ads. And otherwise, once again, everybody, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. There will be new episodes coming out over the holidays. This is technically the last normal episode of the year, but we'll have David Does Tech coming on, Dan coming on over the holidays as well. Those will come out early and ad-free for patrons. And so you'll hear me say it again, but no, I don't think you will, because the David one comes out the day after Christmas, probably. So this is also, Dan, where me and you say, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy whatever, very happy. Have a good winter break, everybody. We will have content coming out during it. And also have a nice week before Christmas, everybody.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Kerry No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Kerry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, Z Jits, Daniel D, Ian Clifford, Aaron Close, Dan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, Brian Riggleman, MJB1, Sam Miller, Deke, SNES Chalmers, Nicholas Buckner, Jim Ferriera, Velcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Andrew S, Gregory S. Acker, Sarcastro, Evan Dingle, HardForum.com, Chris Rich, Craig Wanchuk, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Booma, Compressed Earth Blocks, Shredbird, Dr. Forbin, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Blake, Franco Frederic, Holden Mobley, Jake223, Jake Martin, Sammy Malas, Slicky, Jordan Sivkovic, Stefan Hart, William Leak, Meat and Pork, The Boss Haas, Tim Robb, Penta Winta, Travis Gooding, Stefan, Mads, Suzu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Roger Davies, Michael McGee, Greg, Patrick Crow, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, Ishad, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Chrysantine, Colin Tadars, The Eternal Dreamers, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Zhang, Neither Zing, Michelle Pelt, 331377 Antics, Hexapuma, Toka, Reginald Ari, T. Cottom, Jackson Miller, JSMMH, Gaiman Since Reagan, Jeff Sedler, Loophole 35, Windstar, James I, Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milth Impulse Media, Dave Schultz, Melodic Warrior, Mac Daffy, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, I-711-700K, Jamie Witters, Joe Foot, Hardland, Slushbaugh, C2, My Sharona, Earth, Torres, Jensen, M. Gima, Joseph Kelly, Samuel Park, Keith Moore, Him Sagung, Tails2299, Meal Valverga, John, Venti CZ, Sisyphos, The Forbidden Juice, Per Leachman, RB Racer, AC, Richard Calgo, Winwing, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Med, Alex Vega, Freedy, Brian Wright, John Swin, Jola Martina, Kikum Elbergun, Solarized 80, Thalo215, Matthew Marlowe, Raisin Biscuit, Rennick 1982, Jeff Johnson, Rowan McKickey, Cornster 671, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.